The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Irwin as Samuel Iron Sam Blackwood stood motionless at the edge of the training ground. 58 years had etched deep lines into his weathered face. His posture remained ramrod straight despite the decades of service that should have bent his spine like so many others. The desert wind carried the familiar scent of diesel fuel and dust that had become as much a part of him as his own skin. Blackwood watched the young recruits struggling with their tank drills. Their movements lacked the fluid precision that only comes with years of experience. In 35 days, he would hang up his uniform for good. 35 years of service condensed into a small collection of medals and a retirement watch. The thought sat heavy in his chest. His radio crackled to life. "Captain Blackwood, report to command immediately." The voice belonged to Private Jenkins, a nervous young man who had been assigned as Blackwood's aide during these final weeks. The urgency in the kid's voice caught Blackwood's attention. In peacetime, urgent calls rarely brought good news. "Copy that," Blackwood responded, his voice a gravelly rumble that had earned him respect across multiple conflicts. The walk to command took Blackwood past rows of gleaming M1 Abrams tanks, modern marvels of military engineering, computerized targeting systems, composite armor, turbine engines that could propel 70 tons of steel across terrain at speeds that would have seemed impossible when Blackwood first climbed into a tank in Korea. Progress marched forward, leaving men like him behind, men who relied on instinct and experience rather than digital readouts and satellite guidance. General Wallace stood at the window when Blackwood entered his office. A large map of the Texas-Mexico border region covered the conference table. Several officers huddled around it, their faces grave. "Captain Blackwood," Wallace said without turning, "thank you for coming quickly." Wallace had never been one for pleasantries. Their history stretched back 3 decades to a frozen Korean hillside where both men had learned hard lessons about survival and leadership. The general's hair had gone completely white, but his eyes retained the sharp intelligence that had propelled him up the ranks. "Sir," Blackwood acknowledged, standing at attention. Wallace finally turned. "At ease, Sam. We have a situation." The other officers glanced up from their map, sizing up the aging tank commander. Blackwood recognized the look. He'd seen it countless times over the past decade. The silent question in their eyes. What can this old warhorse possibly contribute in the age of modern warfare? "I'm listening, sir." Wallace gestured to the map. 3 days ago, a group calling themselves the Liberation Force crossed the border and seized control of Eagle Pass. They're heavily armed, well-organized, and appear to have military training. Blackwood studied the tactical markings on the map. Eagle Pass, a critical border crossing with strategic importance beyond its size. Control the pass, control the regional supply routes. "Their demands?" Blackwood asked. "Irrelevant," Wallace replied. "What matters is that we've received intelligence they're expecting reinforcements within 48 hours. Tanks, artillery, possibly air support." One of the younger officers spoke up. "Satellite imagery confirms at least 20 T-72 Soviet export tanks moving toward the border from staging areas south of Piedras Negras." Blackwood felt his pulse quicken slightly. Soviet tanks on American soil. The Cold War scenario that had dominated training exercises throughout his career but had never materialized. "The president has authorized immediate action," Wallace continued. "We need to retake Eagle Pass before those reinforcements arrive." Blackwood nodded. "Standard procedure. Send in the Rangers or Delta Force for a precision strike. Special forces are preparing for insertion." Wallace exchanged glances with his staff. The room grew uncomfortably silent. "Not exactly," Wallace said, something unspoken hiding behind his words. "Sam, I'm activating the 77th Tank Battalion, under your command." The 77th? The Ironclads. Blackwood's unit for the past 15 years. Currently scheduled for deactivation as part of the Army's modernization program. A relic being put to pasture just like its commander. "With respect, sir, the 77th is down to 60% strength. Most of our experienced crews have already been reassigned." Wallace nodded. "I'm aware of the unit's status. This came from the top, Sam. The situation requires a unique approach." Blackwood's instincts flared. Wallace wasn't telling him everything. "May I speak freely, sir?" The general dismissed the other officers with a nod. When the door closed, the tension in the room shifted. "This isn't about the 77th being the best unit for the BA," Blackwood stated flatly. Wallace sank into his chair. For a moment, the stoic general facade slipped, revealing the exhausted man beneath. "You always could read between the lines," Wallace said. The Joint Chiefs are divided on how to respond. The diplomatic situation is, he searched for the right word, complicated. They want deniability, Blackwood concluded. Wallace didn't confirm or deny. He didn't need to. The 77th is already slated for decommission. You're 2 months from retirement. If this goes sideways, the unspoken conclusion hung in the air. They were expendable, the perfect scapegoats if political winds shifted. Blackwood should have felt anger, but instead a strange calm settled over him. One last mission, one final chance to lead the men and women of the 77th into action. When do we deploy? Wallace handed him a sealed folder. 48 hours. Everything you need to know is in here. You'll have access to the armory and support units, but keep your footprint small. And what exactly is the mission objective, sir? Retake Eagle Pass. Neutralize the enemy armor. Make it look easy. Blackwood took the folder. And when the press asks why you sent an obsolete tank battalion instead of special forces, the ghost of a smile crossed Wallace's face. I'll tell them I wanted commanders with real combat experience. Men who know that wars are won by soldiers, not technology. Blackwood tucked the folder under his arm and snapped a salute. As he turned to leave, Wallace spoke again. Sam, choose your crew carefully. This won't be Korea or Desert Storm. This is something else entirely. The weight of those words followed Blackwood into the corridor. The sun had begun its descent when Blackwood reached the motor pool. The massive hangar housed 24 M60 Patton tanks in various states of readiness, not the modern Abrams that dominated current battlefield doctrine. These were the workhorses of a previous era, mechanical beasts that required skilled hands and intimate knowledge to operate effectively. Frank Martinez spotted him immediately. The master sergeant had served as Blackwood's crew chief for over a decade. His weathered hands were black with grease as he extracted himself from the engine compartment of the tank designated Iron Lady Blackwood's personal command vehicle. Captain, Martinez nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. At 45, Martinez was considered old for his rank, but his expertise with the M60 systems made him invaluable. Thought you'd be at the officers' club by now. Isn't tonight the thing for Colonel Peterson's transfer? Plans have changed, Blackwood replied, patting the tank's massive hull affectionately. How's she running? Martinez's expression shifted. After 15 years together, he could read Blackwood's tone. She'll run. Not pretty, but she'll run. Why? We got a training exercise I don't know about? Not training. Blackwood held Martinez's gaze. I need your crew ready to move out at 0600 tomorrow. Full combat load. Martinez's eyes widened slightly, but he asked no questions. That was his way. Act first, understand later. I'll need Thompson as driver, Blackwood continued, and Rollins on the gun. Now Martinez frowned. Rollins, with respect, sir, he's been pushing for transfer to the Abrams program. Been making noise about how the M60 is a museum piece. He's the best gunner in the battalion, Blackwood replied simply, and I need the best. Martinez nodded slowly. I'll find him. Thompson will be easy. Kid practically sleeps under his tank. Jack Thompson was the youngest member of Blackwood's crew at 26. A natural talent behind the controls, he could make the 70-ton vehicle dance through terrain that would stop other drivers cold. What he lacked in experience, he made up for with instinct. Tell them mission briefing at 2100, my quarters. Blackwood turned to leave, then paused. And Frank, this isn't a training exercise, it's the real thing. Martinez straightened. About damn time, sir. As Blackwood crossed the compound toward the command center, he spotted a familiar figure emerging from the intelligence building. Captain Catherine Reynolds walked with the purposeful stride of someone perpetually late for an important meeting. At 38, she had carved out a reputation as one of the sharpest intelligence officers in the division. Her analytical mind had saved Blackwood's unit during joint exercises on more than one occasion. Captain Reynolds, Blackwood called. She turned, surprise registering briefly on her face. Captain Blackwood, I heard you were counting down the days until retirement. News travels fast. Intelligence officer, she replied with a hint of a smile. It's my job to know things. Blackwood gestured toward the command center. Walk with me. They fell into step together, maintaining professional distance. Reynolds had transferred to Fort Irwin 6 months earlier from the Pentagon's analysis division. Rumors suggested she'd been fast-tracked for promotion until an incident involving her refusal to modify intelligence assessments for political considerations. True or not, Blackwood had found her assessments to be unfailingly accurate, if sometimes unwelcome by higher command. I need intel on a developing situation at Eagle Pass, Blackwood said quietly. Reynolds' stride faltered almost imperceptibly. You've been briefed. Not a question. Confirmation that she already knew about the operation. Just the outline, Blackwood replied. I need details, specifically about their armor capabilities. Reynolds glanced around before responding. My office, 15 minutes. Blackwood nodded and they separated, maintaining the appearance of a casual encounter between officers. Back in his quarters, Blackwood opened the mission folder and spread the contents across his desk. Satellite imagery, intelligence reports, operational parameters. The more he read, the more his concern grew. The Liberation Force, as they called themselves, had appeared seemingly overnight, yet operated with the precision of seasoned military units. Their equipment included late-model Soviet bloc vehicles and weapons that shouldn't have been available to a typical insurgent group. A knock at his door interrupted his study. Enter. Reynolds stepped inside, carrying a laptop and several folders. She placed them on the desk without ceremony. This isn't what General Wallace told you, she began without preamble. I had that feeling. Reynolds opened her laptop and entered a complex password. The group at Eagle Pass isn't just some border militia based on signals, intelligence, and movement patterns. They're mercenaries, highly trained, likely former Spetsnaz or similar special forces. Russian-backed? Blackwood asked, though he already suspected the answer. Not officially. Moscow will deny any connection, but the equipment signatures are unmistakable. Latest generation export models of T-72s, possibly even some T-80 variants. Blackwood absorbed this information silently. Modern Russian tanks against his aging M60s. The matchup did not favor his forces. There's more, Reynolds continued. The timing of this incursion aligns perfectly with the naval exercises in the Pacific. Our rapid response forces are committed elsewhere. Creating an opportunity, Blackwood concluded. Reynolds nodded. Eagle Pass is just the beginning. Intelligence suggests they plan to establish a liberated zone along the border, create an international incident that would require diplomatic rather than military resolution. And by the time the diplomats finish talking, they'd have established facts on the ground. Permanent presence, a foothold. Blackwood leaned back in his chair, connecting the dots. That's why they're sending us. The 77th. Old tanks, old commander. If we fail, they blame outdated equipment and poor leadership. If we succeed, you get a nice retirement ceremony, Reynolds finished. Either way, the Pentagon avoids the political complications of deploying frontline units. The cynicism of the strategy didn't surprise Blackwood. He'd seen similar calculations throughout his career. War was never just about the enemy in front of you. It was also about the politics behind you. Why are you telling me this? Reynolds closed her laptop. Because I believe in providing complete intelligence, regardless of whether it fits the preferred narrative. And because you and your crews deserve to know what you're really facing. Blackwood appreciated her candor. What about their air support? The briefing mentioned possible helicopter assets. My-24 Hinds, at least 4, possibly 6. They're being kept across the border for now, but could deploy within 30 minutes of your approach. Attack helicopters. The bane of tank formations since Vietnam. Another piece of the puzzle that made the mission profile increasingly suicidal. Thank you, Captain Reynolds. This information will help me plan accordingly. Reynolds hesitated at the door. Captain Blackwood, this mission has been designed with failure as an acceptable outcome, perhaps even the preferred outcome for certain elements in Washington. Blackwood met her gaze steadily. Then they don't know the 77th very well, do they? After Reynolds departed, Blackwood returned to the satellite imagery. Eagle Pass. The surrounding terrain, approach routes, defensive positions. He began to see possibilities where others might see only certain defeat. The M60 Patton was outclassed by modern T-72s in nearly every category on paper. But battles weren't fought on paper. At precisely 2100 hours, Martinez arrived with Sergeant Eddie Rawlins and Corporal Jack Thompson. Rawlins entered with the perpetual scowl that had become his trademark since being passed over for transfer to the Abrams program. At 32, he had the cocky confidence of a man who knew his skills were exceptional. As a gunner, his instincts were nearly supernatural, anticipating target movements and compensating for variables before conscious thought. Thompson, by contrast, practically vibrated with nervous energy. The youngest of the group had never seen actual combat, having joined after the conclusion of major operations in the Middle East. What he lacked in battle experience, he made up for with an almost symbiotic relationship with his tank. Blackwood had seen him navigate obstacles that instructors deemed impossible. "Gentlemen," Blackwood began, "what I'm about to share is classified. This conversation never happened." He outlined the situation at Eagle Pass, keeping to the official briefing initially. The Liberation Forces occupation, the civilian hostages, the approaching armor reinforcements. With each detail, he observed their reactions. Martinez remained stoic. Rawlins appeared increasingly interested, hunger for real action evident in his posture. Thompson's expression shifted between excitement and apprehension. "Questions so far?" Blackwood asked. "Why us?" Rawlins asked bluntly. "No offense, Captain, but the 77th is headed for the boneyard. The M60 can't match a T-72 in frontal engagement." "That's the official assessment," Blackwood agreed, "and it's precisely why we're being deployed." He shared Reynolds' insights about the political calculations behind their mission, the expected failure, the convenient scapegoating. "They're setting us up," Rawlins concluded, anger flashing in his eyes. "They're underestimating us," Blackwood corrected, "and that gives us an advantage." Martinez nodded slowly. "The brass thinks we're obsolete. The enemy will think the same." "Exactly." Blackwood spread the satellite imagery across the table. "Now let's prove them all wrong." For the next hour, they dissected the terrain around Eagle Pass. The Liberation Force had established defensive positions anticipating a conventional assault from the north. Their armor was positioned to counter exactly the type of frontal engagement that military doctrine would prescribe. "Standard approach would be suicidal," Martinez observed. "So we don't use the standard approach," Blackwood replied. He traced a route along the western edge of the map. "The dry riverbed here, local knowledge says it's passable in the dry season." "That's a 30-mile detour," Rawlins pointed out. "And completely unexpected," Blackwood countered. "We approach from the west at dawn, with the sun behind us." Thompson studied the route with growing excitement. "That could work. The gradient looks manageable for our suspension." Blackwood continued outlining his unconventional battle plan. Instead of deploying the entire battalion as a single unit, he would split them into 3 task forces. Alpha would create a diversion to the north, drawing attention and fire. Bravo would provide overwatch from elevated positions to the southwest. Charlie, led by Blackwood personally, would execute the main thrust through the dry riverbed. "We'll be dangerously exposed during the crossing," Martinez noted. "Yes, but we'll have surprise, and sometimes that's enough." They continued refining the plan until well past midnight. When the others finally departed to prepare their equipment, Blackwood remained at his desk, staring at the maps. The plan was unorthodox, risky, perhaps even foolhardy by conventional standards. But conventional thinking was what the enemy would be expecting. Blackwood picked up an old photograph from his desk. Korea, 1953, his first deployment as a young lieutenant. Standing beside his first tank, surrounded by a crew of men now long dead or scattered to civilian life. The image had yellowed with age, but the memory remained vivid, the bitter cold, the overwhelming Chinese assault, the desperate defense of Hill 468. That day had taught him the most valuable lesson of his military career. Victory often went not to the side with superior equipment, but to the side willing to take calculated risks when others adhered rigidly to doctrine. At 0500 the following morning, Blackwood stood in the pre-dawn darkness, watching his battalion prepare for deployment. 16 M60 Patton tanks, 3 armored personnel carriers, 2 recovery vehicles. A skeleton force compared to standard armored battalions, but perhaps more maneuverable because of it. Reynolds appeared at his side, carrying a secure communications unit. "Latest intelligence," she said quietly, handing him a data drive. "Thermal imaging from overnight surveillance. They've positioned sentries along the northern perimeter, but the western approach remains lightly defended." Blackwood pocketed the drive. "You've been helpful beyond your orders, Captain Reynolds." She met his gaze directly. "My orders are to provide accurate intelligence assessment. That's what I'm doing." "Even so, thank you." She hesitated, then added, "I've arranged to accompany the mission as intelligence liaison. General Wallace approved it this morning." Blackwood raised an eyebrow. "That's not standard protocol for this type of operation. Neither is sending M60 tanks against T-72s." She smiled tightly. "Besides, you'll need real-time signals intelligence to counter their communications." Before Blackwood could respond, Martinez approached with a troubled expression. "Captain, we have a situation with the ammunition loadout." Blackwood excused himself and followed Martinez to the supply depot. Inside, crates of ammunition stood ready for loading, but Martinez pointed to the labels with disgust. Standard heat rounds, Martinez explained, effective against older Soviet armor, but barely adequate against the frontal armor of a T-72, especially if they've been upgraded with reactive armor packages. Blackwood examined the rounds. Martinez was right. The high-explosive anti-tank ammunition had been the standard during their deployments in the Gulf, but technology had advanced since then. What about APFSDS rounds? Blackwood asked, referring to the more advanced armor-piercing, fin-stabilized discarding, sabot ammunition that could penetrate modern tank armor more effectively. Limited supply, Martinez replied, but maybe 20 rounds per tank. They've been prioritized for training the Abrams crews. Another disadvantage. Another calculation that seemed designed to ensure their failure. Load what we have, Blackwood ordered. Distribute the APFSDS rounds evenly. We'll need to make every shot count. Martinez nodded grimly. I'll see to it personally. As the sun began to rise, Blackwood gathered the tank commanders for a final briefing. The mood was a mixture of tension and excitement. For many, this would be their first taste of actual combat. For others, possibly their last deployment before retirement or reassignment. The mission parameters are clear, Blackwood began. Retake Eagle Pass, neutralize enemy armor, minimize civilian casualties. But I want to be equally clear about what this mission really represents. He surveyed the faces before him, men and women who had trained under his command, who trusted his leadership. This is the final deployment of the 77th Tank Battalion. After today, most of you will be reassigned to newer units with modern equipment. The Army calls it progress. A murmur of discontent rippled through the group. But today, we have an opportunity to demonstrate that warfare isn't just about technology. It's about courage, tactics, the human element that no computer system can replace. Blackwood pointed to the map of Eagle Pass. The enemy we face has better equipment on paper. They have defensive positions and local intelligence. What they don't have is what stands before me now. The finest tank crews I've ever had the privilege to command. The murmurs transformed into sounds of agreement. The plan we've developed is unorthodox. It violates several principles of conventional armored warfare. And that's precisely why it will succeed, because the unexpected path is often the path to victory. He outlined the three-pronged approach once more, emphasizing coordination and communication. Each tank commander received their specific objectives and rally points. Contingency plans were reviewed, questions answered. One final note, Blackwood concluded. The M60 Patton is considered obsolete by modern standards, but in the hands of a skilled crew, it remains a lethal weapon system. Today, we remind the world of that fact. The briefing concluded, and the commanders dispersed to their vehicles. Blackwood made his way to Iron Lady, his command tank. The massive vehicle had been with him for over a decade, through countless exercises and deployments. Her olive-drab paint was faded in places, and maintenance crews had been cannibalizing parts for years to keep the aging fleet operational. But like Blackwood himself, the old tank still had fight left in her. Thompson was already in the driver's compartment, running through his pre-deployment checklist. Rawlins performed final calibrations on the gun stabilization system. Martinez supervised the ammunition loading, ensuring the precious APFSDS rounds were properly stowed for quick access. Blackwood climbed onto the turret and surveyed his battalion. Engines roared to life across the staging area, belching diesel smoke into the morning air. The unique rumble of the M60's Continental diesel engine differed sharply from the turbine whine of the Abrams tanks that had replaced them in frontline units. It was an older sound, a sound that had once struck fear into Soviet tank crews during the Cold War. Reynolds approached, now dressed in field gear with communications equipment slung across her shoulder. Your command vehicle has been equipped with enhanced secure communications, she informed him. Direct link to surveillance assets. Blackwood nodded. You'll ride with Bravo Company's command element, maintain signals, intelligence, and keep me informed of any changes in enemy disposition. Understood. She hesitated, then added more quietly, Captain, there's something else you should know. The Liberation Force, our voice analysis suggests their commander is Viktor Zakharov. The name registered immediately. A former Russian tank commander who had gone mercenary after the collapse of the Soviet Union. His tactics in Chechnya and Syria had earned him a reputation for brutal efficiency. You're certain? 90% confidence in the voice match. Blackwood absorbed this new information. Zakharov was no amateur. He would recognize standard American armored tactics and prepare accordingly. Thank you, Captain Reynolds. That's valuable intelligence. She nodded and departed toward her assigned vehicle. Blackwood descended into the commander's position inside the turret. The familiar confines of the tank enclosed him. The smell of metal, oil, and canvas webbing. The instruments and controls worn smooth from years of use. This was home in a way his actual quarters never had been. "Comms check," Martinez called from the loader's position. "Reading you 5 by 5, Blackwood responded, adjusting his headset. "Gun systems operational," Rollins reported from the gunner station below and to Blackwood's right. "Stabilization within parameters." "Engine nominal, hydraulics green, we're ready to roll," Thompson added from the driver's compartment. Blackwood took a deep breath, savoring the moment. One last mission, one final chance to prove that experience and determination could overcome technological superiority. "Iron Lady to all ironclad elements," he broadcast across the battalion frequency. "Prepare to move out. Operation Redemption is go." The convoy of tanks and support vehicles rumbled through the main gate of Fort Irwin as the sun crested the eastern horizon. Military police had cleared the route, keeping curious onlookers and press at bay. The official story would be a routine training exercise. Plausible deniability in motion. Inside the command tank, Blackwood studied the terrain maps as Thompson navigated the massive vehicle onto the highway. 300 miles to Eagle Pass. The plan called for a night march to avoid detection, using secondary roads and terrain features for concealment. By dawn tomorrow, they would be in position for the assault. "What are you thinking, sir?" Martinez asked during a lull in the radio traffic. Blackwood considered the question. "I'm thinking about Korea, Hill 468. Martinez nodded in recognition. The story was well known among the battalion. Lieutenant Blackwood's stand against overwhelming Chinese forces. 3 tanks against 2 companies of infantry and supporting armor. Conventional wisdom said retreat was the only option. Blackwood had chosen to advance instead, striking where the enemy least expected. The hill had held. "Different war, different enemy," Martinez observed. "Same principles," Blackwood replied. "Find the unexpected approach. Strike where they're weakest. Never do what doctrine dictates if the enemy knows the doctrine." Martinez checked the ammunition stowage one more time. "You really think we can take out T-72s with these old girls?" Blackwood patted the steel wall of the turret affectionately. "The M60 has a lower profile than the Abrams. Better hold-down capability in certain terrain, and our 105mm gun can penetrate T-72 armor at the right angle with APF SDS rounds." "At the right angle," Martinez repeated. "That's a lot of variables." "War is nothing but variables, Master Sergeant. Our job is to control as many as possible." The column continued south as the morning progressed. Inside the tank, temperatures began to rise despite the ventilation system's best efforts. The crew fell into familiar routines. Rollins recalibrated the gun sight periodically as road vibrations affected alignment. Thompson navigated with the intuitive skill that had made him Blackwood's first choice as driver. Martinez monitored communications and prepared ammunition for quick loading. By midday, they had reached the halfway point. The convoy pulled into an abandoned quarry for refueling and maintenance. Blackwood emerged from the tank, stretching muscles cramped from hours in the confined space. The desert heat hit him like a physical force after the relative shelter of the tank's interior. Across the temporary staging area, crews performed essential maintenance. Tracks were checked for tension, engines inspected for signs of overheating, communication systems tested and retested. The ballet of mechanical preservation that kept an armored unit operational. Reynolds approached with her communications specialist, a young corporal managing a portable satellite uplink. "Latest intelligence update," where she reported, handing Blackwood a secure tablet. "Thermal imaging from Predator overflights confirmed 12 T-72 tanks at Eagle Pass. 4 positioned at the northern approach. 4 at the eastern bridge. 4 held in reserve near the town center." Blackwood studied the imagery. "Any sign they're aware of our approach?" "Negative. Their communications remain focused on the northern highway. They're expecting a conventional approach from that direction." "And the civilian hostages?" Reynolds indicated a building near the center of town. "Concentrated here. The old courthouse. Approximately 50 personnel based on heat signatures." Blackwood updated his mental map of the battlefield. The western approach through the dry riverbed would avoid both major tank concentrations. If they could neutralize the perimeter guards without alerting the main force, they might achieve total surprise. "What about air assets?" Blackwood asked. "Still across the border, but on high alert. They could deploy within minutes of engagement." Helicopter gunships represented the greatest threat to his force. The M60's anti-aircraft capabilities were limited to the commander's 50 caliber machine gun, hardly effective against armored attack helicopters. We'll need to eliminate their communications capability immediately upon engagement, Blackwood decided. Can your specialist identify their command and control center? Reynolds nodded to the corporal, who brought up another image on the tablet. Signal analysis suggests their primary communications hub is located here. The specialist indicated a building near the eastern end of town. Secondary systems here and here. Blackwood committed the locations to memory. Those become priority targets for our first salvo. No communications, no helicopter support. As the maintenance activities concluded and crews prepared to resume the march, Blackwood gathered his company commanders for an updated briefing. The intelligence from Reynolds had necessitated adjustments to the battle plan. Alpha Company's diversion becomes even more critical, he explained. They need to sell the deception that we're mounting a conventional assault from the north. Bravo Company will target the communications infrastructure immediately upon commencement of operations. Charlie Company, with me, will execute the flanking maneuver through the riverbed. The commanders absorbed the updates, asking clarifying questions about timing and coordination. Blackwood was struck by their professionalism. Despite knowing they commanded outdated equipment against superior forces, not one voiced doubt about the mission's viability. As the briefing concluded, Lieutenant Colonel Harris, commander of Alpha Company, lingered. Permission to speak freely, sir? Always, Colonel. Harris had served with Blackwood for over a decade, a methodical tactician whose by-the-book approach counterbalanced Blackwood's more intuitive style. This mission profile, the equipment disparities, the political calculations behind it. Harris chose his words carefully. It feels like someone wants us to fail, sir. That's a distinct possibility, Blackwood acknowledged. Yet you seem confident. Blackwood considered his response. I'm confident in our people, in their training and adaptability. The rest, he gestured vaguely, is just variables to be managed. Harris nodded slowly. For what it's worth, there's no one else I'd rather have commanding this mission. The men know it too. The simple statement carried significant weight coming from the normally reserved Harris. Blackwood felt a surge of responsibility for the lives under his command. We'll get it done, Colonel, and we'll bring our people home. As the convoy resumed its journey south, Blackwood returned to the confines of his command tank. The interior had become an oven despite the cooling systems. Sweat soaked through his uniform as he settled into the commander's position. 98 degrees inside, Martinez reported matter-of-factly, going to get worse before nightfall. Blackwood remembered the stories his father had told about tank warfare in North Africa during World War II. Temperatures inside Sherman tanks had regularly exceeded 120 degrees. Men had suffered heat stroke even as they fought for their lives against Rommel's panzers. By comparison, their current discomfort seemed minor. Maintain hydration, Blackwood ordered. Rotate positions every 2 hours to allow recovery time. The tank column continued through the afternoon heat. Radio discipline remained tight, with only essential communications transmitted. The further south they traveled, the more Blackwood felt the weight of command. Every decision, every adjustment to the plan carried potential consequences in human lives. Thompson navigated the massive tank with the delicate precision that had made him legendary among the battalion's drivers. Despite the M60's mechanical steering system lacking the hydraulic assistance of newer models, he maneuvered through challenging terrain without hesitation. How are we looking on fuel consumption? Blackwood asked. Within parameters, Thompson replied. The engine's running clean. We should reach the staging point with reserve capacity. Rawlins, typically vocal with complaints about the M60's outdated systems, had grown uncharacteristically quiet as they approached the operational zone. Now he spoke up from the gunner's position. Captain, request permission for an ammunition adjustment. Blackwood raised an eyebrow. Explain. I've been studying the thermal profiles of the T-72s from Captain Reynolds' intelligence. Based on the exhaust patterns, they're likely fitted with first-generation reactive armor packages. Our standard heat rounds will be partially neutralized. That's been accounted for, Blackwood replied. That's why we're prioritizing APF-SDS for frontal engagements. Yes, sir, but I'd like to modify our loading sequence. Instead of alternating heat and APF-SDS, I propose we load heat rounds with different delay fuse settings. Martinez looked skeptical. The purpose? The first round detonates the reactive armor panel. The second, with delayed fusing, penetrates the compromised area. Blackwood considered the suggestion. It was unorthodox, not found in any tactical manual, but potentially effective. It would require precise timing, Martinez noted, an identical target acquisition for consecutive shots. I can make the shots, Rollins stated with absolute conviction. Blackwood made his decision. Make the adjustments, but only for our tank. I want to see results before we implement across the battalion. As evening approached, the convoy diverted from the main highway onto secondary roads. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, slowing their progress, but providing better concealment from potential observation. By nightfall, they had reached the final staging area, a natural depression 20 miles north of Eagle Pass. The tanks formed a defensive perimeter, engines idling to maintain power for essential systems while conserving fuel. Blackwood exited his tank, stretching painfully after hours in the confined space. The night desert air felt shockingly cool against his sweat-soaked uniform. Reynolds had established a temporary intelligence center in one of the armored personnel carriers. Inside, satellite feeds and signal intelligence reports created a real-time picture of their objective. No change in enemy disposition, she reported. They remained focused on the northern approach. And the western route? The riverbed? Clear. But there's a complication. She indicated a weather satellite image. Flash flood warning for the region. There's a storm system moving in from the west. Blackwood studied the weather pattern. Time frame? Uncertain. These systems can accelerate quickly in this terrain. If it hits while you're in the riverbed, the implication was clear. Flash floods could transform the dry riverbed into a raging torrent within minutes, potentially trapping the entire company. We'll adjust the timetable, Blackwood decided. Move up the assault by 2 hours. We cross the riverbed at 0400 instead of 0600. Reynolds nodded, updating the operational timeline. That reduces your preparation time significantly. Better than being caught in a flash flood. Blackwood returned to the tank circle where the company commanders had gathered for the final briefing. The adjustment to the timeline was received with professional acknowledgement, despite the added pressure it created. Final coordinates were distributed, communication protocols confirmed, contingency plans reviewed one last time. As the briefing concluded, Blackwood addressed the assembled officers directly. What we do tomorrow isn't just about retaking Eagle Pass. It's about demonstrating that the human element in warfare remains paramount. That skill, courage, and tactical flexibility can overcome technological advantages. He looked at each commander in turn, meeting their eyes. The 77th Tank Battalion may be scheduled for deactivation, but tomorrow we write our final chapter. Make it one they'll remember. The commanders dispersed to their units, carrying Blackwood's words with them. In the darkness, tank crews performed final preparations. Weapons were cleaned and checked, ammunition arranged for efficient access, navigation systems programmed with waypoints and rally positions. Blackwood returned to the intelligence center where Reynolds continued monitoring enemy communications. Any indication they've detected our presence? She shook her head. Their patrol patterns remain unchanged. Regular radio checks on schedule. No signs of elevated alert status. And Zakharov? Any transmissions from him specifically? One approximately 30 minutes ago. She played a recorded transmission, the Russian commander's voice speaking in accented English. Maintain vigilance on the northern approach. American doctrine dictates they will attempt to seize the high ground overlooking the town before advancing. Be prepared for artillery preparation followed by armored thrust. Blackwood smiled grimly. Zakharov was anticipating conventional tactics. Textbook approaches taught at West Point in the armor school. The very doctrine Blackwood intended to violate. He's fighting the last war, Blackwood observed. Or he's setting a trap, Reynolds cautioned. Zakharov is known for misdirection. Either way, our approach through the riverbed circumvents his expectations. Reynolds nodded, but her expression remained concerned. There's something else. Signals intelligence detected communications between Eagle Pass and an airfield across the border. The helicopter assets are being prepared for immediate deployment. Time frame? They've been placed on 30-minute alert status. Blackwood absorbed this information. Attack helicopters could decimate his tank formation if they caught them in the open. We'll need to neutralize their communications capability immediately upon engagement, he decided. No radio, no helicopter support. I've identified their primary and backup transmitters, Reynolds confirmed. Coordinates have been programmed into your targeting systems. Blackwood returned to his tank for a few hours of rest before the assault. Inside, the crew had transformed the cramped interior for night operations. Instrument panels glowed with subdued red lighting that preserved night vision. The air remained stifling despite the cooler exterior temperatures. Martinez had prepared a simple meal of combat rations, which they ate in rotation, always maintaining at least one crew member on alert status. The ritual reminded Blackwood of countless nights before battle throughout his career. The same nervous energy, the same gallows humor, the same unspoken acknowledgement that some might not survive the coming day. "Get some rest," Blackwood ordered. "2-hour rotation. I'll take first watch." As his crew settled into the uncomfortable positions that passed for sleeping arrangements inside the tank, Blackwood climbed into the commander's cupola. The desert night spread around him, stars brilliant in the clear air. In the distance, the lights of small communities punctuated the darkness, civilians unaware of the battle that would erupt with the coming dawn. Blackwood thought about the intelligence Reynolds had provided. Zakharov, T-72 tanks with reactive armor, helicopter gunships on alert. Everything indicated a force specifically designed to counter American armored tactics, a trap waiting to be sprung. Yet here came the 77th, old tanks, aging commander, written off by Pentagon planners and politicians, expendable. Blackwood smiled in the darkness. Being underestimated had its advantages. Throughout history, some of the most decisive victories had come from commanders and units that the enemy dismissed as irrelevant. Perhaps the 77th would add its name to that list, or perhaps they would die trying. Either way, they would show the world that the human element in warfare remained paramount, that courage, skill, and tactical flexibility could overcome technological superiority. As the hours ticked by, Blackwood rotated watch duties with his crew. Each man took their turn at rest, finding what sleep they could in the uncomfortable confines of the tank. At 0300, Blackwood roused everyone for final preparations. "Weather update?" he asked as Martinez handed him a steaming cup of instant coffee. "Stormfront's accelerating," Martinez reported. "Flash flood warnings extended to our entire operational area. We've got maybe 5 hours before it hits." Blackwood nodded. The adjusted timeline had been the right call. Fuel status? Topped off during the night. All vehicles at maximum capacity. Ammunition? Distributed as ordered. Your special loading sequence is ready for implementation. Throughout the tank circle, engines rumbled to life, breaking the desert silence. The distinctive sound of the M60's diesel power plants created a symphony of mechanical power. Hatches closed. Communication checks commenced. The battalion transformed from individual vehicles into a coordinated fighting unit. "Iron Lady to all ironclad elements," Blackwood broadcast. "Execute Operation Redemption. Phase 1 commence." The tanks began moving in their assigned formations. Alpha Company headed northeast, creating the impression of a conventional approach along expected avenues. Bravo Company moved to elevated positions southwest of the target, preparing to provide overwatch and precision fire on command and control targets. Charlie Company, led by Blackwood, turned west to begin their circuitous approach to the dry riverbed. Inside the command tank, the crew functioned with the synchronized efficiency that came from years of training together. Thompson guided the massive vehicle through the darkness, using minimal lighting to avoid detection. Rawlins continuously adjusted his gun sight, accounting for changing terrain and elevation. Martinez monitored battle group communications, relaying essential updates to Blackwood. Alpha Company reports movement proceeding as planned. No indication of enemy awareness. Blackwood acknowledged the update. The deception element of the operation remained critical. Alpha Company needed to create sufficient activity to draw attention without becoming decisively engaged before the main assault commenced. The tank column reached the edge of the dry riverbed as first light began to illuminate the eastern horizon. Blackwood surveyed the terrain through his night vision equipment. The riverbed stretched before them, a natural avenue cut through the landscape by centuries of seasonal flooding. Rocky in places, sandy in others, it presented challenging but manageable terrain for tracked vehicles. "Thompson, take us in. Standard interval. Maintain 15-yard spacing." "Roger that, Captain." Thompson guided the tank down the embankment into the riverbed with practiced precision. The column of tanks followed. They were found their massive forms casting long shadows in the early morning light. The dry watercourse provided natural concealment, its banks rising 15 to 20 feet above the desert floor in most places. For the next hour, Charlie Company advanced through the riverbed. The terrain proved more challenging than anticipated. In several places, tanks had to navigate around massive boulders deposited by previous floods. Sandy patches threatened to bog down the heavy vehicles until Thompson discovered that slightly higher speed provided better traction through these areas. 3 kilometers to exit point, Martinez reported as they approached the final stage of their approach. Blackwood checked the time, 0535, ahead of schedule despite the terrain challenges. The eastern sky had brightened considerably, but the high banks of the riverbed still provided concealment from observation. Iron Lady to all Charlie elements, prepare for Phase 2, weapons hot, load APFSDS primary. Across the company, loaders rammed the specialized armor-piercing rounds into breaches. The distinctive clank of metal on metal echoed through the riverbed. Gun systems powered up. Targeting computers initialized. Inside the command tank, Martinez loaded the first round using Rawlins' modified sequence. 2 heat rounds with different fuse settings, ready for rapid fire against reactive armor. Final communications check, Blackwood ordered. Alpha Company in position, came the response. Drawing attention as planned, enemy forces responding with perimeter adjustments. Bravo Company ready. Target acquisition complete on primary communications nodes. Reynolds' voice joined the tactical net. Intelligence confirms no change in helicopter status. Still on 30-minute alert. All elements in position. The trap ready to be sprung. Not the trap Zakharov anticipated, but Blackwood's own design. As they approached the western exit from the riverbed, Blackwood stood in the commander's cupola, scanning the terrain ahead. Eagle Pass lay just beyond the next ridge. The enemy tanks remained focused on the northern approach where Alpha Company's diversion had captured their attention. This is it, Blackwood announced to his crew. Everything we've trained for, everything we've prepared for. One final mission to prove what the 77th can do. Thompson guided the tank up the embankment, the powerful engines straining against the incline. Behind them, the remainder of Charlie Company followed in perfect formation. As they crested the ridge, the full battlefield came into view. Eagle Pass spread before them, unaware of the armored formation approaching from the unexpected western avenue. In the distance, dust clouds marked the position of Alpha Company's diversionary maneuvers. Closer, the enemy's tank formations remained oriented toward the northern threat, presenting their vulnerable rear aspects to Blackwood's force. All ironclad elements, Blackwood broadcast. Execute Phase 2. I say again, execute Phase 2. The final assault was about to begin. The 77th Tank Battalion scheduled for deactivation, overlooked by planners, underestimated by enemies, prepared to write its final chapter. Captain Samuel Iron Sam Blackwood settled into his commander's position, feeling a calm certainty wash over him. Win or lose, the coming battle would demonstrate that in warfare, the human element remained paramount. That courage, skill, and tactical flexibility could overcome technological superiority. That obsolescence was a state of mind, not a function of equipment age. Driver advance. Gunner target. Let's remind them who we are. The morning sun crested the eastern ridge, bathing the battlefield in golden light. From his position in the commander's cupola, Blackwood had a perfect view of Eagle Pass. The small border town lay nestled in the valley below, its buildings casting long shadows across the streets. Through his binoculars, he could see the enemy tanks positioned around the northern perimeter, their gun barrels pointed away from Charlie Company's approach vector. All elements in position, Martinez confirmed, monitoring the battalion net. Alpha Company has their attention. Bravo is locked on communications targets. Blackwood took one final moment to survey the battlefield. The 77th Tank Battalion was about to execute an assault plan that violated conventional armored doctrine in nearly every respect. Success would require perfect coordination, split-second timing, and more than a little luck. Commence firing, Blackwood ordered, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. All units, execute Phase 2. The morning stillness shattered as Bravo Company opened fire from their elevated positions southwest of town. Their first salvos targeted the communications infrastructure Reynolds had identified. The old courthouse erupted in flames as precision fire struck the antenna arrays on its roof. Secondary explosions indicated ammunition or fuel storage within the building. Target hit, came the confirmation over the tactical net. Primary communications hub destroyed. Secondary targets engaged, another tank commander reported. Direct hits on all backup systems. Inside the command tank, Blackwood nodded with grim satisfaction. The first objective had been accomplished. Without communications, the Liberation Force couldn't call in their helicopter gunships. The playing field had been slightly leveled. Charlie Company, advance, Blackwood ordered. Echelon right, target enemy armor, fire at will. Thompson gunned the engine, sending the massive M60 lurching forward. Behind them, the remainder of Charlie Company followed in perfect formation, maintaining tactical spacing as they emerged from concealment. The element of surprise remained complete. The enemy tanks, still focused on the northern diversion, presented their vulnerable rear aspects to Blackwood's force. Target acquired, Rawlins announced from the gunner's position. T-72, range 2,000 meters, rear aspect. Fire when ready, Blackwood commanded. Rawlins squeezed the trigger. The tank shuddered as the 105mm main gun roared. The distinctive crack of the APFSDS round, leaving the barrel at supersonic velocity, echoed across the valley. Through his sight, Blackwood watched the depleted uranium penetrator streak toward its target. Hit! Martinez called out as the enemy tank erupted in flames. Catastrophic kill! Across the battlefield, Charlie Company's tanks opened fire. The coordinated volley caught the Liberation Force completely unprepared. 3 more enemy tanks exploded as armor-piercing rounds found their vulnerable rear armor. Advancing to phase line Bravo, Blackwood ordered, directing Thompson to increase speed. The tank battalion surged forward, pressing their momentary advantage. The initial success, however, proved fleeting. The enemy recovered from their surprise with professional efficiency. The remaining T-72s began traversing their turrets, bringing their more powerful 125mm guns to bear on Blackwood's approaching force. Enemy tanks responding, Martinez warned. They're repositioning to engage. The first return fire came seconds later. A T-72 round screamed overhead, missing Blackwood's tank by meters. The near miss served as a stark reminder of their vulnerability. The Soviet-designed tanks outranged the M60s, their more powerful guns capable of penetrating American armor at ranges where Blackwood's own weapons might struggle. Close the distance, Blackwood ordered. All Charlie elements, increase speed, get inside their effective range envelope. Thompson pushed the throttle to maximum, the M60's engine roaring in response. The tank accelerated to its top speed of 30 miles per hour. Impressive for a 70-ton vehicle, but still sluggish compared to modern standards. The vibration inside the crew compartment intensified, making precision aiming nearly impossible. 2,000 meters, Martinez called out, tracking their advance. Entering mutual engagement range. The battlefield erupted in chaos as both sides exchanged fire. The air filled with the supersonic crack of tank rounds and the thunder of impacts. Through the periscope, Blackwood watched one of his tanks take a direct hit, its turrets separating from the hull in a catastrophic explosion. Peterson's tank is hit, Martinez reported grimly. No survivors. Blackwood had no time to mourn. Continue advance. Target enemy command tank. Reynolds' voice broke through on the tactical channel. Blackwood, be advised. Signals intelligence confirms Zakharov has ordered reserve tanks forward from town center. You'll have contact in approximately 2 minutes. 4 more enemy tanks entering the battle. The odds, already challenging, tilted further against the 77th. Blackwood quickly reassessed the situation, searching for an opportunity amidst the growing chaos. Bravo Company, he called. Shift fire to southeastern quadrant. Delay those reinforcements. Roger that, came the response. Engaging. Blackwood's command tank crested a small rise, bringing them face-to-face with a T-72 at 800 meters. Too close to evade, too close to miss. Target front, Rawlins called out, already rotating the turret. Load heat sequence, Blackwood ordered, gambling on Rawlins' modified ammunition plan. The enemy fired first. The T-72's 125mm round struck the front slope of the M60's armor, the impact rocking the American tank back on its suspension. Inside, the crew was thrown against their restraints as superheated metal splashed across their vehicle. Glancing hit, Martinez reported, checking systems. Frontal armor holding. Fire, Blackwood commanded. Rawlins sent the first heat round downrange. The high-explosive anti-tank projectile struck the T-72's reactive armor panels, detonating in a flash of light and smoke. Before the dust cleared, Martinez had loaded the second round with the modified fuse setting. Fire again, Blackwood ordered. The second shot followed milliseconds behind the first. As Rawlins had theorized, the initial round had depleted the reactive armor panel, creating a vulnerability. The second heat round struck the same location, its delayed fusing allowing penetration before detonation. The T-72 shuddered as the shaped charge punched through its compromised protection and ignited the ammunition inside. Target destroyed, Rawlins confirmed, unable to hide the satisfaction in his voice. The sequence works. All Charlie elements, Blackwood broadcast. Implement heat sequence against frontal aspects. 2 rounds, same impact point, delayed fusing on second shot. The modified firing protocol spread across the company, increasing their effectiveness against the superior Russian armor. The battlefield tactics shifted as the American tanks maneuvered to bring their guns to bear while minimizing exposure to return fire. Thompson demonstrated his exceptional skill as driver, using terrain features to achieve hold-down positions whenever possible. The technique, mastered through countless training exercises, allowed the M60 to present only its turret as a target while retaining firing capability. "We got movement from the town," Martinez warned, infantry deploying with anti-tank weapons. A new threat emerged as Liberation Force soldiers appeared along the western edge of Eagle Pass. They carried shoulder-launched missiles capable of disabling or destroying tanks at close range. "Engage infantry targets with coax," Blackwood ordered, referring to the coaxial machine gun mounted alongside the main cannon. Rawlins traversed the turret, bringing the 7.62mm machine gun to bear on the approaching infantry. Controlled bursts of fire forced the enemy soldiers to seek cover, temporarily disrupting their advance. 1,000 meters to town perimeter, Martinez reported. The tank battle had devolved into a swirling melee of armored behemoths. The structured formations of the initial assault had given way to individual engagements as tanks maneuvered for advantage. Through the tactical net, Blackwood monitored his battalion status. 3 tanks destroyed, 2 damaged but operational. The remainder still in the fight, pressing forward despite the odds. "Alpha Company reports enemy northern perimeter collapsing," Martinez relayed. "They're beginning their advance into town." The coordinated attack was working. The Liberation Force, caught between multiple threats, struggled to maintain cohesion. Their superior equipment provided individual advantages, but failed to compensate for the tactical surprise and coordinated American assault. Reynolds' voice cut through the tactical chatter. "Blackwood, be advised. Drone surveillance has detected helicopter activity across the border. 4 Mi-24 Hinds preparing for takeoff." Despite the destruction of their communications infrastructure, the enemy had managed to summon air support. The appearance of helicopter gunships would dramatically shift the balance of the engagement. "Estimated time to arrival?" Blackwood demanded. 12 minutes, Reynolds replied. "Maybe less." Blackwood made a quick calculation. They needed to secure the town center before those helicopters arrived. Once airborne, the Hinds would decimate any exposed armor. "All elements, increase tempo," Blackwood ordered. "We need to secure critical objectives before air assets arrive. Charlie Company, proceed to phase line Delta. Secure the hostages at the courthouse." Thompson guided the tank through the western outskirts of Eagle Pass. The transition from open desert to urban terrain created new challenges. Buildings restricted movement options. Narrow streets created potential ambush points. The M60's size became a liability rather than an asset. "Contact front," Rawlins called out as a T-72 appeared at an intersection 300 meters ahead. The enemy tank had the advantage of position, its turret already oriented toward Blackwood's approaching vehicle. Time compressed as both gunners raced to acquire their targets. The T-72 fired first. Its 125mm round screamed toward Blackwood's tank, missing by inches and demolishing a storefront behind them. The proximity of the explosion showered the M60 with debris, temporarily blinding Thompson through his vision blocks. "Can't see," the driver reported, bringing the tank to an abrupt halt. 8 o'clock alleyway, Blackwood directed. "Reverse into cover." Thompson expertly backed the massive vehicle into a narrow passage between buildings, providing temporary shelter from the enemy's direct fire. Rawlins kept his gun trained on the intersection, waiting for an opportunity. "He'll flank us," Martinez warned. "Standard Soviet doctrine. He'll move to higher ground for shot advantage." Blackwood had anticipated this. "That's exactly what I'm counting on." He switched to the battalion net. "Sierra 3, this is Iron Lady. Execute crossfire protocol. Target moving north on Madison Street." "Sierra 3 copies," came the response from another Charlie Company tank positioned 2 blocks east. "Target acquired. Engaging." The T-72 appeared briefly at the intersection, moving exactly as Martinez had predicted. It never completed its maneuver. Sierra 3's APFSDS round caught it from the side, penetrating its thinner flank armor and igniting its ammunition carousel. The resulting explosion rattled windows throughout the neighborhood. "Target destroyed," Sierra 3 confirmed. Blackwood directed Thompson back onto the street. "Resume advance to the courthouse. All elements maintain dispersed formation. Use buildings for cover whenever possible." The urban environment forced Charlie Company to divide into smaller units, advancing along parallel streets toward the town center. The technique increased their vulnerability individually, but prevented any single ambush from endangering the entire force. 5 minutes until helicopter arrival, Reynolds updated. Blackwood scanned the street ahead. The courthouse stood 2 blocks away, its stone facade pockmarked by earlier fire. Intelligence indicated 50 civilian hostages held inside, complicating any direct assault. We need to secure those hostages before the helicopters arrive, Blackwood decided. Martinez, contact Bravo Company. Have them target any open areas around the town center. Create smoke coverage using white phosphorus rounds. Copy that, Martinez replied, relaying the orders. Within moments, white phosphorus shells began impacting open areas around the courthouse. The specialized rounds erupted into billowing clouds of dense white smoke, obscuring visibility and potentially masking the tanks from helicopter gunners. All Charlie elements, Blackwood ordered, converge on the courthouse, prepare for hostage evacuation. The M60 accelerated down the street, engine straining as Thompson pushed it to maximum speed. Behind them, the remaining tanks of Charlie Company moved into position, establishing a perimeter around the objective. As they approached the courthouse steps, a new threat emerged. Liberation Force soldiers appeared at windows and doorways, firing rocket-propelled grenades at the advancing tanks. The handheld anti-tank weapons lacked the power to penetrate frontal armor, but could disable tracks or damage external equipment. Suppressive fire, Blackwood ordered. Cokes and 50 cal, keep their heads down. The tank's machine guns opened up, spraying the courthouse facade with sustained fire. The heavy 50 caliber rounds from the commander's weapon punched through walls and windows, forcing the defenders to seek better cover. Infantry element moving into position, Martinez reported as a squad of American soldiers that had accompanied the tank battalion rushed forward under the covering fire. Reynolds' voice cut through the tactical net once more. Helicopters crossing the border. 3 minutes to your position. Time was running out. Blackwood needed to secure the hostages and establish defensive positions before the gunships arrived. Cover the infantry approach, he ordered. Use the tank as a shield. Thompson positioned the M60 at the base of the courthouse steps, its massive bulk providing cover for the advancing infantry. Under this protection, the soldiers rushed the entrance, breaching the doors with explosive charges and flowing into the building. Tense minutes passed as Blackwood monitored the infantry's progress through radio reports. Room by room, they cleared the courthouse, neutralizing resistance and locating hostages. Hostages secured, came the welcome report. Beginning evacuation through east entrance. Charlie elements, Blackwood ordered. Form defensive perimeter. Prepare for air attack. The tanks repositioned, using buildings for cover while maintaining overlapping fields of fire. Each vehicle carried a limited supply of anti-aircraft ammunition for its 50 caliber machine gun, hardly adequate against armored helicopter gunships, but better than nothing. The distinctive thumping of helicopter rotors reached them before visual contact. The sound echoed between buildings, making it difficult to pinpoint the approaching threat. Visual contact, Rawlins reported. 2 Hinds approaching from the southeast. Angels 1. The Soviet-designed attack helicopters appeared at the edge of town, flying at extremely low altitude to utilize terrain masking. Their sleek profiles bristled with weapons rocket pods, cannon, and most concerning anti-tank guided missiles. All elements maintain smoke coverage, Blackwood ordered. Use buildings for concealment. Hold fire unless you have a guaranteed shot. The Mi-24s began their attack run, missile pylons swiveling as their sensors sought targets through the smoke. Their 30mm cannons opened fire, stitching lines of destruction across the town center as they searched for the American tanks. They're using infrared to see through the smoke, Martinez warned. Our engine heat is giving away our position. One of the helicopters launched a missile. The anti-tank guided weapon corkscrewed through the air before slamming into a Charlie Company tank positioned near the town square. The explosion tore through the lighter top armor, instantly killing the crew. Sierra 5 is hit, Martinez reported grimly. Catastrophic kill. Blackwood knew conventional tactics offered limited options against the helicopter threat. The M60's main gun lacked the elevation and tracking speed to engage aerial targets effectively. The 50 caliber machine gun could potentially damage vulnerable components, but required the gunship to approach within its shorter range. We need to change the equation, Blackwood decided. Thompson, move us to the central intersection. Martinez, load heat. Sir? Martinez questioned, surprised by the ammunition selection. Just do it, Blackwood ordered, a plan forming in his mind. Rawlins, target the church bell tower, eastern face. Thompson guided the tank into the town's main intersection, deliberately exposing them to draw attention. The maneuver worked perhaps too well. Both Hinds banked sharply, orienting toward the suddenly vulnerable American tank. Target acquired, Rawlins confirmed, the gun tube elevating to its maximum angle. Bell tower, eastern face. Fire, Blackwood commanded. The heat round streaked toward the old church, impacting the stone bell tower at precisely the point Blackwood had indicated. The structure, already weakened by earlier fighting, began to collapse. Stone and debris cascaded downward, directly into the path of the approaching helicopters. The lead Hind attempted to pull up, its pilot reacting with impressive speed, but the heavy gunship lacked the agility to escape completely. Chunks of stone and steel struck its tail rotor, sending the helicopter into an uncontrolled spin. It crashed into the street 3 blocks away, secondary explosions indicating the detonation of its remaining ordnance. Good effect on target, Martinez observed with professional understatement. The second Hind broke off its attack run, climbing rapidly to escape the debris cloud. The maneuver forced it into a predictable flight path, one that brought it within range of Bravo Company's tanks on the ridgeline. Bravo elements, Blackwood broadcast. Hind approaching your position from the southwest. Engage with all available weapons. The tanks on the ridge opened fire simultaneously. While no single machine gun presented a serious threat to the armored helicopter, the combined volume of fire created a lethal concentration. The Hind shuddered as multiple rounds found vulnerable components. Smoke began trailing from its engine compartment as the pilot fought to maintain control. A final burst from a Bravo Company commander's .50 caliber struck something critical. The helicopter's engine erupted in flames, sending the burning aircraft into an uncontrolled descent. It crashed beyond the town perimeter, the explosion visible even through the lingering smoke. Both air assets destroyed, Reynolds confirmed through the tactical net. Drone surveillance shows no additional helicopters preparing for launch. A momentary lull settled over the battlefield as both sides absorbed the changing situation. The Liberation Force had lost their armored advantage. Their air support had been neutralized. Their communications disrupted. The momentum had shifted decisively. Status report, Blackwood requested, using the temporary respite to assess his battalion's condition. The reports flowed in from company commanders. Alpha had secured the northern section of town, destroying 2 enemy tanks and capturing numerous infantry. Bravo maintained overwatch positions, providing fire support and preventing enemy reinforcement from the south. Charlie had suffered the heaviest losses, 4 tanks destroyed, 2 damaged beyond immediate repair, but had achieved their primary objective of securing the hostages. Reynolds, what's the enemy disposition? Blackwood asked. Fragmented, she replied. Drone surveillance shows small groups retreating toward the southern border. 2 T-72s remain operational, positioned near the eastern bridge. Infantry strength, approximately 30 personnel, establishing defensive positions around the bridge access. The Liberation Force was preparing for a last stand at their remaining escape route. With reinforcements unlikely and their position compromised, Zakharov would be looking to extract as many of his forces as possible. We can't allow them to escape, Blackwood decided. If they withdraw across the border, they'll regroup and return with greater strength. He studied the town map, identifying approach routes to the eastern bridge. Direct assault would be costly. The T-72s had established hold-down positions with excellent fields of fire covering the access roads. Supporting infantry with anti-tank weapons further strengthened their defense. Martinez, contact Reynolds. I need detailed drone imagery of the storm drainage system, specifically the main outlet near the eastern bridge. Martinez relayed the request, confusion evident in his expression. You're thinking about the storm drains, sir? Thompson asked from the driver's position. Eagle Pass was built on a floodplain, Blackwood explained. The town's drainage system was designed to handle flash floods from the surrounding hills. The main outlet should be large enough for infantry access. Reynolds confirmed this assessment moments later. Drainage outlet identified 200 meters southwest of the bridge, approximately 6 feet in diameter. No signs of enemy awareness or defensive preparations at that location. Perfect, Blackwood replied. Martinez, contact Lieutenant Garcia's infantry squad. Have them proceed to the drainage access point near the courthouse. They'll advance through the system and emerge behind enemy positions. That's a risky approach, sir, Martinez cautioned. If the enemy detects them in that confined space, it's unexpected, Blackwood stated simply, and right now that's our greatest advantage. While the infantry prepared for their subterranean advance, Blackwood reorganized his remaining armor. The surviving tanks of Charlie Company formed 2 elements. The first, under Blackwood's direct command, would approach the bridge from the northwest, drawing enemy attention. The second, led by Lieutenant Colonel Harris, would circle around to the southwest, ready to exploit any breakthrough. All elements in position, Martinez reported after completing the coordination. Begin diversionary engagement, Blackwood ordered. Charlie Company's tanks advanced toward the bridge, utilizing buildings and terrain features for partial concealment. As expected, the T-72s opened fire immediately, their 125mm rounds demolishing structures and forcing the American tanks to move cautiously. Maintain suppressive fire, Blackwood commanded. Keep their attention focused forward. For the next 20 minutes, the tanks engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse. The Americans would appear briefly, fire a round or two, then retreat before the superior enemy guns could acquire them. The tactic prevented effective counterfire while maintaining pressure on the defensive position. Infantry reports they're in position, Martinez announced, awaiting your command. Execute, Blackwood ordered simply. The American infantry emerged silently from the drainage outlet, directly behind the Liberation Forces' defensive line. With practiced efficiency, they deployed anti-tank mines along the bridge access road, the enemy's planned escape route. Only after securing this critical objective did they open fire on the unsuspecting defenders. Caught in a classic hammer and anvil, the Liberation Forces' discipline began to crumble. The T-72s attempted to reorient to counter the new threat, exposing their vulnerable side armor to Blackwood's tanks in the process. Target acquired, Rawlins announced. T-72, right side aspect. Fire, Blackwood commanded. The APFSDS round struck the enemy tank just behind the turret ring, penetrating the thinner side armor and detonating the ammunition carousel. The catastrophic explosion separated the turret from the hull, sending it cartwheeling through the air. Seeing their armored support destroyed, the Liberation Force infantry began a disorganized retreat across the bridge. They made it halfway before the lead vehicle triggered one of the recently placed mines. The explosion blocked the narrow bridge, trapping the remaining forces on the American side. Cease fire, Blackwood ordered, as white flags began appearing among the enemy positions. Accept their surrender. The fighting at Eagle Pass concluded with surprising swiftness. Deprived of leadership, communications, and escape routes, the remaining Liberation Force soldiers surrendered. American infantry secured the prisoners while the tanks established a defensive perimeter against any potential counterattack. All objectives secured, Martinez reported with evident satisfaction. Eagle Pass is back under American control. Blackwood allowed himself a moment of pride in his battalion's achievement. Against superior equipment, and despite heavy odds, the 77th had accomplished its mission. The obsolete tanks and their veteran crews had proven their worth when it mattered most. His satisfaction proved short-lived. Reynolds approached his command tank, her expression grave. Captain Blackwood, we have a problem. She handed him a tablet displaying thermal drone imagery of the terrain south of Eagle Pass. A large heat signature was moving northward across the border, a column of vehicles approaching at high speed. Reinforcements? Blackwood asked, studying the image. Yes, Reynolds confirmed. Significantly larger than intelligence predicted. At least 20 armored vehicles, including tanks and BMPs, plus support elements. Blackwood calculated quickly. His battalion had suffered heavy losses during the fight for Eagle Pass. Ammunition was running low. Fuel reserves were limited. Taking on a fresh enemy force of superior size would be suicidal. Time to intercept? 40 minutes, Reynolds replied. Maybe less if they maintain current speed. Blackwood keyed his command radio. All ironclad elements. Priority transmission. Enemy reinforcements approaching from the south. Estimated strength battalion plus. Prepare for immediate defensive operations. The responses came quickly as company commanders acknowledged the new threat. The brief victory celebration transformed into grim determination as the 77th prepared for an even greater challenge. Martinez, ammunition status? Blackwood demanded. Critical, his crew chief replied. Average 3 APFSDS and 5 heat rounds per tank. Machine gun ammunition at 30%. Not enough for a prolonged engagement against a fresh enemy force. Blackwood needed to adjust his strategy accordingly. Reynolds, terrain analysis. I need defensive positions with maximum advantage for our remaining assets. She indicated a series of low ridges 3 miles north of town. Natural choke point here. The approaching force would be channeled between these rock formations. Limited maneuver space. Excellent hull-down positions for our tanks. Perfect, Blackwood nodded. Martinez, contact General Wallace. Inform him of our situation and request immediate air support. Martinez's expression revealed his doubt. Air assets were committed to the Pacific exercise, sir. That's why we were deployed instead. Things changed, Blackwood replied. The strategic situation has escalated beyond our initial parameters. Make the request. While Martinez relayed the call for reinforcement, Blackwood organized the withdrawal from Eagle Pass. The liberated hostages and wounded personnel would be evacuated first, transported in captured enemy vehicles under infantry escort. The tanks would follow once civilian safety was assured, establishing defensive positions at the choke point Reynolds had identified. Withdrawal commencing, Martinez reported as the first evacuation vehicles departed northward. Infantry reports all hostages accounted for. Excellent. Prepare our withdrawal. We'll take rearguard position. Thompson maneuvered the command tank to the northern edge of town, positioning it to cover the retreat of the remaining American forces. From this vantage point, Blackwood could monitor both the evacuation progress and the approaching enemy column. Movement at the southern perimeter, Rawlins reported suddenly. Vehicle approaching under white flag. Blackwood raised his binoculars. A single BTR-80 armored personnel carrier advanced slowly from the direction of the border, a white sheet attached to its antenna. The universal signal for parley. Hold fire, Blackwood ordered. Let them approach. The vehicle stopped 100 meters from the American position. Its rear hatch opened and a single figure emerged. Even at this distance, Blackwood recognized the distinctive bearing of a career military officer. The enemy commander had come personally to negotiate. Cover me, Blackwood instructed his crew. I'm going to meet him. Martinez looked alarmed. Sir, that could be Zakharov himself. It's too dangerous. Which is precisely why I need to hear what he has to say, Blackwood replied, already climbing from the turret. He descended from his tank, removing his helmet but keeping his sidearm holstered at his side. Protocol for battlefield meetings demanded leaders approach alone, but prudence required readiness for treachery. The two officers met in the open ground between their respective forces. The enemy commander stood tall, despite a visible limp, his weathered face bearing the scars of previous conflicts. He wore no insignia, but his bearing confirmed Blackwood's suspicion. This was indeed Viktor Zakharov, former Soviet tank commander turned mercenary. Captain Blackwood, Zakharov greeted him in heavily accented English. Your reputation precedes you. As does yours, Colonel Zakharov, Blackwood replied, noting the brief flash of surprise in the other man's eyes. Though you seem to have misplaced your uniform insignia. A thin smile crossed the Russian's face. A necessary precaution in my line of work. Plausible deniability, I believe your State Department calls it. Why request this meeting? Blackwood asked, dispensing with further pleasantries. Your reinforcements are less than 30 minutes out. Are you here to offer surrender? Zakharov's laugh held genuine amusement. Surrender? No, Captain. I came to offer you the same professional courtesy you extended to my forces at the courthouse. A chance to withdraw without further bloodshed. Generous, Blackwood replied dryly. But American forces don't abandon American soil. This isn't about territory, Zakharov countered. It's about political calculation. My employers didn't expect such vigorous resistance. They anticipated a measured diplomatic response, not a direct military engagement. They miscalculated. Perhaps, Zakharov conceded. Or perhaps they were misinformed about American resolve. Either way, the strategic equation has changed. My reinforcements carry equipment that would significantly escalate this conflict beyond what either of our governments desires. Blackwood studied the Russian carefully. What equipment? Manpads. SA-24 Grinch. Latest generation. Effective against your tactical aircraft up to 20,000 feet. Zakharov paused, allowing the implication to sink in. My employers are prepared for escalation, Captain. Are yours? The introduction of advanced anti-aircraft missiles would indeed change the strategic balance. Any air support Wallace managed to divert would face a far deadlier reception than anticipated. What exactly are you proposing? Blackwood asked. Simple. You withdraw beyond the ridgeline. My forces complete our assigned mission and depart within 12 hours. No further engagement, no escalation. Both sides claim victory for their respective audiences. And what mission would that be? Zakharov smiled thinly. That remains confidential, but I can assure you it involves no permanent presence and no further civilian involvement. Blackwood considered the proposal. The 77th had already achieved its primary objectives, liberating the town and freeing the hostages. Further engagement against superior forces with advanced anti-aircraft capabilities would likely result in additional casualties with limited strategic gain. Yet something felt wrong. Zakharov's offer seemed too convenient, too calculated. "You're not known for retreat, Colonel," Blackwood observed. "Why the sudden interest into escalation?" A flicker of respect showed in the Russian's eyes. "Perceptive. Let's just say certain elements within your government would prefer this situation remain contained. My employers received updated instructions after your unexpected success at Eagle Pass." The implications were clear. Someone in Washington had direct communication with Zakharov's backers. The same political calculation that had sent the obsolete 77th into battle now sought to limit the consequences of their unexpected victory. "I need to consult with my command," Blackwood stated, neither accepting nor rejecting the proposal. "Of course," Zakharov nodded. "You have 15 minutes, Captain. After that, my reinforcements will be in position, and the opportunity for a clean disengagement will have passed." Blackwood returned to his tank, mind racing with implications and suspicions. Martinez helped him climb back into the turret, his expression questioning. "Well?" the master sergeant prompted. "Contact Reynolds," Blackwood ordered instead of answering directly. "I need to speak with her immediately." Reynolds arrived minutes later, ducking into the limited shelter provided by the tank's turret shadow. "You spoke with Zakharov?" she asked without preamble. "Yes. He offered terms for mutual disengagement." Blackwood recounted the conversation, including the Russians' implications about political connections. Reynolds' expression darkened as he spoke. "It matches intelligence we've been gathering. There are elements within the State Department pushing for diplomatic resolution rather than military confrontation. Even after we've achieved tactical success?" "Especially after that," Reynolds replied grimly. "Your victory wasn't part of their calculation. The 77th was supposed to demonstrate the need for upgraded equipment and increased defense budgets, not prove that obsolete tanks could still win battles." The cynicism of the assessment matched Blackwood's growing suspicion. They had been set up to fail, and their success had become politically inconvenient. "What about General Wallace? Has he responded to our request for reinforcement?" "Yes," Martinez interjected. "Message just came through. Air support is being diverted from the Pacific exercise. ETA 90 minutes. Too late to counter the immediate threat, but perhaps enough to prevent further incursion if Zakharov's forces violated any agreement." "And the evacuation?" Blackwood asked. "Hostages and wounded are clear," Martinez confirmed. "Remaining forces are withdrawing to the choke point as ordered." Blackwood weighed his options. Accepting Zakharov's terms meant ceding ground they had fought and died to reclaim. Refusing meant facing overwhelming force with depleted resources. Neither choice aligned with his military instincts. "Sir," Martinez spoke again, his tone uncharacteristically hesitant, "the men are asking what we're going to do. They're ready to make a stand if that's your decision." The loyalty of his crews momentarily overwhelmed Blackwood. These men and women had followed him into what many considered a suicide mission. They had overcome superior enemy forces through skill and determination. Now they awaited his decision on whether to fight once more against even greater odds. "Thompson," Blackwood addressed his driver. "Fuel status?" 30% reserve, Thompson replied. "Enough for combat operations or withdrawal, not both." "Rawlins' gun system?" The gunner's voice came from below. "Operational, but barrel wear is approaching critical. Accuracy beyond 1,500 meters is compromised." Blackwood absorbed these reports, adding them to his calculation. Even at full strength, the 77th would struggle against the approaching reinforcements. In their current condition, a defensive engagement would be heroic but ultimately futile. "Martinez, contact all company commanders, execute withdrawal to Rally Point Delta, establish defensive positions at the choke point." "We're accepting Zakharov's terms?" Martinez asked, surprise evident in his voice. "No," Blackwood replied firmly. "We're choosing the battlefield. The 77th doesn't retreat, we advance to defensible terrain." The distinction might seem semantic to outsiders, but to military professionals, it represented a crucial difference. They weren't abandoning the fight, they were repositioning for tactical advantage. Reynolds nodded in understanding. "The choke point provides better defensive options. If Zakharov violates the agreement, you'll be in position to exact a higher price." "Exactly," Blackwood confirmed, "and it gives our air support time to arrive if needed." The withdrawal proceeded with professional efficiency. The remaining tanks of the 77th moved northward in echelon formation, maintaining combat readiness while conserving fuel. From his command position, Blackwood monitored the approaching enemy column via drone feed on Reynolds' tablet. True to Zakharov's word, they had halted their advance, maintaining position just south of Eagle Pass. As the last American tank cleared the ridgeline, Blackwood ordered a defensive perimeter established. Each vehicle took up a hull-down position, using the natural terrain for cover while maintaining overlapping fields of fire. If Zakharov's forces attempted to push beyond Eagle Pass, they would face a prepared defense in favorable terrain. All elements in position, Martinez reported. Defensive perimeter established. Maintain combat readiness, Blackwood ordered. Zakharov may test our resolve once his forces are fully assembled. Hours passed with no sign of enemy advance. The drone feed showed the Liberation Force reinforcements entering Eagle Pass, establishing positions throughout the town, but making no move toward the American perimeter. True to his word, Zakharov appeared to be honoring the disengagement agreement. As evening approached, General Wallace arrived via helicopter, accompanied by staff officers and a contingent from the State Department. The general's expression as he approached Blackwood's tank spoke volumes about the political complications that had developed. Captain Blackwood, Wallace greeted him formally. The Joint Chiefs send their congratulations on a successful operation. Thank you, sir, Blackwood replied, equally formal. He recognized the carefully chosen language, an acknowledgement of tactical success without commitment to strategic follow-through. Wallace introduced the State Department representative, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a permanent expression of mild concern. Mr. Davidson has been authorized to negotiate the final resolution of this incident, the general explained, his tone conveying his personal opinion of this arrangement. Negotiate? Blackwood questioned. Sir, we've liberated American territory from hostile occupation. What's there to negotiate? Davidson cleared his throat. Captain, the geopolitical situation is complex. Our intelligence confirms these forces will withdraw completely within the time frame specified. Pursuing further military action would unnecessarily escalate tensions with several key diplomatic partners. The diplomatic double talk confirmed what Reynolds had suggested. Political considerations would trump military necessity. The 77th's victory would be reframed as a mutual disengagement, denying them full recognition for their achievement. Your battalion performed admirably, Captain, Wallace added, genuine respect in his voice. You accomplished the mission against overwhelming odds. That won't be forgotten. By you, perhaps, Blackwood replied quietly, but I suspect the official record will reflect a different narrative. Davidson didn't deny this assessment. The official position will be that American forces successfully secured the hostages, after which both sides agreed to disengage to prevent further escalation. It serves everyone's interests. Everyone except the men who died retaking that town, Blackwood stated flatly. An uncomfortable silence followed. Even Davidson had the grace to look momentarily abashed. There will be commendations, Wallace assured him. Your men's sacrifice will be honored, even if the full context remains classified. Blackwood understood the reality. The 77th had been deployed as a sacrificial element, expected to demonstrate the need for military modernization through their failure. Their unexpected success had created a political complication that would now be managed through careful narrative control. What about the 77th? Blackwood asked. Will the deactivation proceed as scheduled? Wallace exchanged glances with his staff before responding. There's been a modification to that plan. In light of your performance, the Joint Chiefs are reevaluating the battalion's status. You've demonstrated that properly led and trained, even legacy equipment can remain effective in certain operational contexts. A partial victory, then. The 77th might survive in some form, though Blackwood harbored no illusions about significant investment in their aging equipment. And Captain Reynolds? Blackwood inquired, nodding toward the intelligence officer who had provided crucial support throughout the operation. Being considered for commendation as well, Wallace replied. Her intelligence assessments proved remarkably accurate under challenging circumstances. The formalities concluded, Wallace dismissed his staff and the State Department representative, requesting a moment alone with Blackwood. When they had departed, the general's official manner dropped away. You did one hell of a job, Sam, he said, using Blackwood's first name for the first time since the mission began. Pulled off what most of the Pentagon thought impossible. We had good people, Blackwood replied simply, and the enemy underestimated what these old tanks could do in the right hands. Wallace nodded. There's a lesson there that some of our more technology-focused planners could stand to learn. Wars are won by soldiers, not equipment specifications. Will anyone in Washington actually learn that lesson? Blackwood asked skeptically. Probably not, Wallace admitted. But those of us who understand combat know the truth. You've reminded everyone that the human element remains the decisive factor in warfare. As night fell over the defensive perimeter, Blackwood stood in his command tank's cupola, watching the distant lights of Eagle Pass. By morning, if Zakharov honored his word, the town would be empty of foreign forces. The crisis would officially end as a diplomatic resolution rather than the military victory it actually represented. Martinez climbed up beside him, offering a thermos of coffee. "The men are asking what happens next, sir." Blackwood accepted the coffee, considering his response. "We return to base, file our reports, prepare for whatever mission comes next. And the official story will be whatever Washington decides serves their interests," Blackwood replied without bitterness. "But we'll know what really happened, what we accomplished." Martinez nodded slowly. The 77th proved itself when it mattered most. Yes, it did. They stood in silence, watching the horizon where heat lightning occasionally illuminated the distant mountains. Tomorrow would bring politicians and press, carefully crafted statements and redacted reports. But tonight belonged to the tank crews who had defied expectations and achieved victory against overwhelming odds. "You know," Martinez said after a while, "Thompson and Rawlins were talking about requesting transfer to your next command, wherever that might be." Blackwood smiled slightly. "Getting attached to an old warhorse like me isn't the best career move." "Maybe not," Martinez shrugged, "but there's something to be said for serving under a commander who knows how to win when everything's stacked against you." The simple statement carried profound meaning coming from the veteran sergeant. In a profession where life and death hung on leadership decisions, such loyalty represented the highest form of professional respect. "We'll see what comes next," Blackwood replied. "For now, let's make sure everyone gets home safely." As Martinez descended back into the tank, Blackwood remained at his observation position, contemplating the battle they had fought and the lessons it contained. The 77th Tank Battalion, scheduled for deactivation and deployed as an expendable element, had instead demonstrated the enduring truth of warfare. The human element, properly led and motivated, could overcome technological disadvantage. Whether Washington acknowledged that lesson or not, it had been written in fire and courage across the battlefield of Eagle Pass. For the men and women of the 77th, that knowledge would have to be enough. Inside the tank, Thompson and Rawlins had begun their nightly maintenance routines, checking systems and preparing for potential action despite the apparent cessation of hostilities. Their professionalism never wavered, regardless of political complications or uncertain futures. Blackwood smiled to himself. These were the people who had made victory possible, not advanced technology or sophisticated weapons, but dedicated professionals committed to their mission and each other. The battle for Eagle Pass might be rewritten in official histories, but for the ironclads of the 77th, the truth would endure. They had faced the best equipment their adversaries could field and prevailed through skill, courage, and tactical innovation. In a world increasingly dominated by technology, they had proven that the most critical component of military success remained the human element. That was a victory no political narrative could diminish. As the night deepened, Blackwood maintained his vigil, standing on watch over his battalion as he had countless times throughout his career. The mission wasn't complete until every member of the 77th returned safely to base. Only then would he consider his final obligation fulfilled. The distant rumble of thunder echoed across the valley, nature's reminder that forces beyond human control still shaped the battlefield. The storm that had threatened their approach to Eagle Pass now gathered strength to the west, promising to wash away the evidence of combat by morning. Fitting, Blackwood thought. The physical traces of their victory might disappear, but the achievement itself would endure in the memories and experiences of those who had participated. Some lessons could only be learned through fire and struggle, regardless of how official narratives might later be constructed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and political complications. But tonight, the 77th Tank Battalion stood victorious, having accomplished what many had deemed impossible. For a commander nearing the end of his career, Blackwood could ask for no greater satisfaction. Dawn broke over the defensive perimeter with a palette of crimson and gold. Samuel Blackwood stood in the commander's cupola, watching the sunrise with the practiced eye of a man who had seen too many battlefield mornings. The storm that had threatened overnight had passed to the east, leaving the air crisp and clear. Perfect visibility, perfect weather for what might be the final combat operation of his career. "Drone feed confirmed," Martinez reported from below. "Eagle Pass is clear. The Liberation Force completed withdrawal 30 minutes ago." Blackwood nodded, unsurprised. Viktor Zakharov was many things: mercenary, opportunist, possibly war criminal, but he had always been a man of his word. The tactical disengagement had proceeded exactly as negotiated. Any sign of sabotage or booby traps? Blackwood asked, mindful of the Russians' reputation for leaving unpleasant surprises behind. Negative. They departed in good order, left nothing behind except some empty ammo crates and ration wrappers. A professional withdrawal, then? Further evidence that these had been no ordinary mercenaries. The entire operation demonstrated levels of training, equipment, and discipline normally associated with special forces or elite military units. General Wallace is requesting your presence at the command briefing, Martinez added. 15 minutes. Blackwood descended into the tank, feeling every one of his 58 years in protesting muscles and stiff joints. 36 hours without proper rest had taken their toll. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the battle had long since dissipated, leaving bone-deep fatigue in its wake. Thompson slept in his driver's seat, his young face relaxed in exhaustion. Rawlins performed maintenance on the gun stabilization system, his movements mechanical but precise. Both men had performed beyond expectation during the engagement, confirming Blackwood's judgment in selecting them for his crew. "Wake Thompson," Blackwood instructed Martinez. "I want the tank ready to move at a moment's notice." "You don't trust Zakharov's withdrawal?" Martinez asked, though his actions already showed agreement with the precaution. "I trust what I can verify," Blackwood replied. "Until we physically secured Eagle Pass, we maintain combat readiness." The command briefing took place in a hastily established operations center, a large tent erected behind the defensive line. General Wallace stood beside a digital map display, surrounded by staff officers and intelligence analysts. Captain Reynolds monitored a bank of communications equipment, coordinating with drone operators and satellite surveillance teams. "Captain Blackwood," Wallace acknowledged his arrival, "thank you for joining us. We're conducting final verification of enemy withdrawal before proceeding with reoccupation." Blackwood studied the tactical display. Drone footage showed Eagle Pass empty of military presence, aside from a few civilian vehicles returning to check on abandoned properties. Thermal imaging confirmed no hidden personnel or equipment within the town limits. Satellite surveillance tracked the Liberation Force convoy moving steadily southward, already 20 miles beyond the border. "Verification complete," Reynolds announced. "All enemy forces have withdrawn beyond the established perimeter. No indications of deception or hidden elements." Wallace nodded in satisfaction. "Very well. We'll proceed with Phase 3 occupation and normalization." He turned to Blackwood. "Captain, your battalion will lead the re-entry. Secure the town center and establish defensive positions along the southern approach. Infantry will follow to conduct detailed sweeps for any remaining threats." "Yes, sir," Blackwood acknowledged. He hesitated, then added, "Request permission to speak freely, General." Wallace dismissed the staff with a gesture, leaving only himself, Blackwood, and Reynolds in the command center. "Go ahead, Sam." "This feels wrong," Blackwood stated bluntly. "Zakharov withdrew too easily. The force he brought as reinforcement could have overwhelmed our position, regardless of terrain advantage." "Maybe he recognized the strategic situation had changed," Wallace suggested. "Air support was inbound. Continuing the engagement would have escalated beyond his authorization." "Or maybe this was the plan all along," Blackwood countered. "Occupy Eagle Pass, generate an incident, then withdraw on schedule regardless of resistance." Reynolds spoke up from her monitoring station. "Captain Blackwood may be right, sir. Signal analysis of their communications suggests the withdrawal was predetermined. The timing aligns too precisely with their original operational timeline." Wallace considered this assessment, his expression troubled. "You're suggesting this entire incident was theater? For what purpose?" "Testing our response capabilities," Blackwood proposed. "Probing our defensive protocols. Evaluating how quickly we could project force to the border." "Or creating a distraction," Reynolds added, "drawing attention and resources to Eagle Pass while something else occurred elsewhere." The implications hung in the air between them. If Eagle Pass had been merely a diversion, where was the main effort? What had they missed while focusing on the border incursion? Pure speculation at this point, Wallace decided, but worth investigating. "Captain Reynolds, expand surveillance parameters. Look for unusual activity throughout the region during the time frame of the Eagle Pass occupation." "Yes, sir." "In the meantime," Wallace continued, "we proceed as planned. Secure Eagle Pass, restore civilian governance, demonstrate that American territory remains under American control." Blackwood returned to his tank with the general's orders, but also with growing unease. 35 years of military experience had honed his instincts for battlefield deception. Something about the Liberation Force's withdrawal felt choreographed a performance for unseen observers rather than a tactical necessity. "We're moving into town," he informed his crew as he climbed into the commander's position. "Reoccupation and security operations." "Any resistance expected?" Rollins asked, completing his maintenance routine on the main gun. "Officially, no. The enemy has withdrawn completely." Blackwood's tone conveyed his personal reservations about this assessment. Thompson, now fully alert after his brief rest, picked up on the subtext. "But we're maintaining combat protocols?" "Full combat readiness," Blackwood confirmed. "Until proven otherwise, we treat this as a tactical situation with potential hostile elements." The tank column formed up along the ridge line, engines rumbling in the morning air. Despite the previous day's losses, the 77th still presented an impressive display of American military power. 16 tanks remained operational, their battle-scarred armor testament to the fighting they had endured. "All elements ready?" Martinez reported, monitoring the battalion net. "Alpha Company in the lead. Bravo providing overwatch, Charlie forming the reserve." "Proceed to phase line echo," Blackwood ordered. "Standard combat spacing." The tanks advanced toward Eagle Pass in tactical formation, using terrain features for concealment despite the apparent absence of threats. Years of training and combat experience had instilled habits that overrode intellectual assessments of safety. In war, complacency killed more effectively than enemy fire. As they approached the town limits, Blackwood studied the urban landscape through his binoculars. The previous day's fighting had left visible scars, shattered windows, bullet-pocked walls, collapsed structures where tank rounds had found their targets. Yet surprisingly, much of the town remained intact. The Liberation Force had shown unusual restraint in their occupation and defense. "Thompson, take us to the main intersection," Blackwood directed. "Rollins, maintain weapons readiness. Martinez, keep all channels open for civilian or military contact." The tank rumbled into Eagle Pass, its tracks clattering against the asphalt streets. Building by building, the battalion secured the town, establishing checkpoints at key intersections and deploying infantry to clear structures. Local police began emerging from hiding places, offering assistance in restoring order and identifying potential threats. "Town hall secured," came the report from Alpha Company. "No enemy presence. Records appear undisturbed." "Courthouse clear," reported another element. "Evidence of prisoner holding facilities, but no booby traps or sabotage." Each report reinforced Blackwood's sense that the occupation had been strangely circumscribed. The Liberation Force had seized control, established defensive positions, then departed without the wholesale destruction or looting typical of mercenary operations. It felt more like a military exercise than an actual hostile takeover. "Captain Blackwood," Reynolds' voice came through his command channel. "We found something at the water treatment facility. You should see this personally." Blackwood redirected his tank toward the facility at the eastern edge of town. The water treatment plant served both Eagle Pass and surrounding communities, processing river water into potable supply for thousands of residents. Reynolds waited outside the main building, accompanied by a squad of infantry and what appeared to be technical specialists in hazardous materials gear. Her expression confirmed Blackwood's growing suspicion that they had missed something significant. "What am I looking at?" he asked after dismounting from his tank. "Evidence of tampering," she replied, leading him into the facility. The Liberation Force stationed guards here throughout their occupation, restricting access even to maintenance personnel. Inside, the technical specialists had opened an access panel to one of the main filtration systems. A device approximately the size of a briefcase had been attached to the water purification mechanism. Its construction appeared sophisticated electronic components and what looked like sealed containers of liquid connected to timing circuits. "Chemical dispersal system," one of the specialists explained, "designed to introduce compounds into the water supply at programmed intervals." "What compounds?" Blackwood demanded. "Unknown without laboratory analysis. But given the delivery mechanism, likely chemical or biological agents capable of surviving water treatment protocols." Reynolds added, "We found 3 such devices throughout the facility, all connected to different distribution systems. Together, they could contaminate water supplies for the entire region." The implications were staggering. While the 77th had focused on the obvious military threat in the town center, the Liberation Force had been installing the means to poison thousands of civilians through their drinking water. "Were the devices activated?" Blackwood asked. studying the ominous apparatus. No, the specialist replied. They're in standby mode, programmed for activation approximately 6 hours from now, well after the withdrawal was complete. Remote deactivation capability? Possible but unlikely. The system appears designed for autonomous operation once initiated. Blackwood considered the strategic implications. If the water supply had been contaminated, the results would have been catastrophic. Mass casualties, overwhelmed medical facilities, panic and civil disorder throughout the region, all occurring days after the Liberation Force had departed, creating plausible deniability for the perpetrators. Can you disarm them? The specialist nodded cautiously. We're working on safe removal protocols now. The devices aren't booby-trapped in any conventional sense, but we're proceeding with extreme caution. I want hourly updates, Blackwood ordered, and expand the search to all utility infrastructure. If they targeted the water system, they may have placed similar devices elsewhere. As Reynolds coordinated the expanded search, Blackwood returned to his tank and contacted General Wallace on the secure channel. We've been played, sir, he reported bluntly, describing the discovery at the water treatment facility. The conventional military operation was cover for a much more sinister objective. Wallace's response was immediate and emphatic. Lock down the entire town. No civilian re-entry until we've cleared every potential target. I'm sending CBRN specialists from Fort Hood to assist with identification and neutralization. Chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear specialists, the military's experts in weapons of mass destruction, their deployment confirmed the seriousness with which command viewed the discovery. What about pursuit? Blackwood asked. Zakharov's force has a 6-hour head start, but with aerial surveillance. Already in motion, Wallace replied, but our priority has to be securing Eagle Pass and preventing activation of any additional devices. We can't risk splitting our focus if there are more surprises waiting to be triggered. The next 12 hours transformed into a methodical, building-by-building search of Eagle Pass. The 77th secured the perimeter while specialized teams examined critical infrastructure and public facilities. By nightfall, they had discovered 7 more devices similar to those at the water treatment plant, power distribution centers, communication nodes, even the school ventilation system, each designed to activate after the Liberation Force had withdrawn, creating maximum chaos while maintaining plausible deniability. Final building cleared, Martinez reported as the search teams completed their sweep. No additional devices detected. Blackwood acknowledged the report with grim satisfaction. They had prevented a catastrophe, though the civilian population remained unaware of how close they had come to disaster. For security reasons, the discoveries had been classified, with only vague statements about infrastructure concerns released to the public. Reynolds approached his tank as darkness fell, her face showing the strain of continuous operations. Preliminary analysis confirms our suspicions. The devices contained a sophisticated compound similar to VX nerve agent, but modified for enhanced persistence in water systems. Casualties have deployed? Thousands, she replied simply, with ongoing effects for months. The scale of the averted attack put their conventional battle in stark perspective. The Liberation Force's tanks and infantry had never been the primary threat. They were merely the visible element in a much more insidious operation. Any success tracking Zakharov? Blackwood asked. He's gone to ground, Reynolds admitted. Surveillance lost his convoy after they crossed into Mexico. Local authorities are cooperating in the search, but her expression completed the thought. A professional like Zakharov would have multiple extraction plans and identities prepared. The chances of apprehension diminished with each passing hour. General Wallace has called an emergency briefing, she added, 20 minutes at the command center. The command center had been relocated to the town hall, a more secure and permanent facility than the field headquarters. When Blackwood arrived, he found not only General Wallace, but also senior representatives from multiple intelligence agencies and the State Department. The presence of such high-level officials confirmed his suspicion that the Eagle Pass incident had escalated far beyond a routine border incursion. Gentlemen, ladies, Wallace began once all key personnel had assembled. What we've discovered here represents an unprecedented attack on American soil. Had these devices activated as planned, we would be facing a mass casualty event unlike anything in our recent history. The general activated a secure display showing satellite imagery of facilities similar to those in Eagle Pass, but located elsewhere along the southern border. We've identified at least 3 other potential target locations that match the Eagle Pass profile: critical infrastructure, limited military presence, significant civilian population. Teams are en route to conduct similar sweeps of these locations. Blackwood studied the imagery, recognizing the strategic pattern. Each target controlled essential resources or transportation nodes. Together, they created a corridor of vulnerability along the southern border. This wasn't just terrorism, Wallace continued. The scale, coordination, and resources involved suggest state-level sponsorship disguised as non-state actors. Classic hybrid warfare doctrine. "Do we have confirmation of which state?" asked one of the intelligence officials. "Not yet," Wallace replied. "But the technical signature of the devices matches known designs from former Soviet bioweapons programs. Captain Reynolds is coordinating with forensic specialists to establish definitive attribution." Reynolds stepped forward, activating a secondary display showing a complex network diagram. "We've been analyzing communications patterns before and during the Eagle Pass occupation. There appear to be multiple command layers, suggesting the Liberation Force was merely the visible element of a much larger operation." She highlighted a node in the network. "This entity, which we've designated Kingfisher, appears to be the operational coordinator. They maintained communication with Zakharov throughout the incident, including during his meeting with Captain Blackwood." "Any indication of their identity or location?" Wallace asked. "Nothing conclusive. The communications were heavily encrypted and routed through multiple cutouts. However, linguistic analysis suggests native Russian speakers attempting to mask their communications patterns." The intelligence officials exchanged meaningful glances at this revelation. The implication of Russian state involvement carried geopolitical ramifications beyond the immediate tactical situation. "What about the State Department contacts Zakharov alluded to during his meeting with Captain Blackwood?" one of the agency representatives asked. "Any progress identifying this individual?" "We're pursuing several leads," Wallace replied carefully, "but that investigation falls outside our immediate operational concerns." The careful phrasing revealed political sensitivities that transcended the military chain of command. If Zakharov had indeed been communicating with elements within the American government, the implications extended into realms of counterintelligence and potential treason. "Our priority remains securing the border region and preventing additional attacks," Wallace continued. "Captain Blackwood, I'm tasking the 77th with security operations at Eagle Pass for the next 72 hours, until reinforcements from Fort Hood can assume responsibility." "Yes, sir," Blackwood acknowledged. "What about pursuit operations against Zakharov's force?" "Special operations teams have taken over that mission," Wallace replied. "Your battalion has already exceeded every reasonable expectation. It's time to rotate you back for rest and reconstitution." The briefing concluded with additional assignments and coordination details. As the participants dispersed, Wallace motioned for Blackwood to remain behind. "That was a hell of a catch at the water treatment plant, Sam," the general said when they were alone. "Without your instincts about something being wrong with Zakharov's withdrawal, we might not have initiated the expanded search in time." "Just doing my job, sir," Blackwood replied automatically. "Well, your job just saved thousands of lives." Wallace's expression turned thoughtful. "The Joint Chiefs have been discussing the future of the 77th Battalion in light of your performance here." "Sir?" "The original deactivation plan has been suspended indefinitely. Instead, the battalion will be transitioned to a specialized role focused on asymmetric warfare and counter-hybrid threats." Blackwood absorbed this news with cautious optimism. The 77th would survive, though likely in a modified form. "And the M60s?" he asked, concerned about the fate of the aging but proven tanks. "Being reevaluated," Wallace replied. "Your success with the modified ammunition sequence against reactive armor has some of our technical specialists reconsidering the platform's capabilities. There's talk of a limited modernization program, fire control upgrades, powertrain improvements, maybe even active protection systems." This represented a significant shift from the Pentagon's previous position that the M60 had reached the end of its useful service life. The battalion's performance at Eagle Pass had apparently forced a reconsideration of that assessment. "And what about you, Sam?" Wallace asked. "Still planning on retirement?" Blackwood hadn't considered his personal future since the mission began. The immediate demands of combat had pushed longer-term considerations aside. Now, with the crisis contained, he found himself facing the same decision point that had confronted him before Eagle Pass. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "A lot depends on what happens next with the battalion." Wallace nodded understanding. "Take some time to think about it. Whatever you decide, your position at the 77th remains open." After what you accomplished here, no one would question your continuing in command despite the normal age restrictions. The offer represented rare recognition in a system that typically prioritized youth and advancement over experience and proven leadership. Under normal circumstances, Blackwood would have been gently but firmly guided toward retirement, regardless of his performance. The exemption spoke volumes about how the Eagle Pass operation had changed perceptions. "Thank you, sir. I'll give it serious consideration." "Do that," Wallace replied. "And Sam, whatever you decide, you've reminded a lot of people that warfare remains fundamentally about humans making decisions under pressure, not just about technology and equipment specifications." Blackwood returned to his tank with Wallace's words resonating in his mind. The past 48 hours had tested his leadership, tactics, and courage in ways he hadn't experienced since his earliest combat deployments. By any objective measure, he should be eager for retirement, for an escape from the physical demands and mental stress of command. Yet he felt strangely invigorated. The mission had awakened something he'd feared lost the clarity of purpose that came with facing and overcoming seemingly impossible challenges. In an age of increasing automation and remote warfare, Eagle Pass had demonstrated the enduring importance of experience, judgment, and direct leadership. His crew awaited his return, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and pride. They had performed beyond any reasonable expectation, turning obsolete equipment and limited resources into decisive advantages through skill and determination. "Orders, sir?" Martinez asked as Blackwood settled into the commander's position. "Security operations for the next 72 hours, Blackwood replied. "We're maintaining control of Eagle Pass until reinforcements arrive from Fort Hood. And then we head home. Mission accomplished." The simple phrase carried complex emotions for all of them. They had deployed expecting their final action before deactivation. Instead, they had written a new chapter in the battalion's history, one that would ensure its continuation in some form. "The general mentioned something about the 77th's future," Blackwood added. "Seems our performance has caused some reconsideration of the deactivation order." This news brought visible relief to the crew. For career soldiers like Martinez, the battalion represented not just a military unit, but a professional home, a community of shared experience and purpose. "About damn time someone in Washington recognized what we can do with these old girls," Rawlins commented, patting the turret ring affectionately. His earlier complaints about the M60's obsolescence had transformed into proprietary pride following their success against superior equipment. Thompson grinned from the driver's station. "Does this mean I don't have to learn the Abrams systems after all? Because I was kind of enjoying being the best driver in the battalion." The light-hearted moment reflected the shift in morale throughout the unit. They had deployed under the shadow of failure and obsolescence. They returned with the confidence that comes from overcoming superior forces through skill and determination. The next 3 days passed in a blur of security operations, equipment maintenance, and coordination with incoming forces. Civilian authorities gradually resumed control of Eagle Pass as the immediate crisis subsided. News reports characterized the incident as a limited incursion repelled by American forces, with no mention of the more sinister chemical threat they had averted. Some truths remained classified for the greater good. On the morning of their scheduled departure, Blackwood stood before the assembled battalion for a final address. The tank crews and supporting infantry formed neat ranks in the town square, their vehicles arrayed behind them in a display of American military power. "3 days ago," Blackwood began, his voice carrying across the formation, "we deployed to Eagle Pass with limited expectations. The 77th Tank Battalion scheduled for deactivation. Equipment considered obsolete, a final mission before retirement." He surveyed the faces before him, recognizing in each the mixture of pride and exhaustion that followed successful combat operations. "What we encountered here tested every aspect of our training, equipment, and determination. We faced superior numbers, superior technology, and evolving threats. By conventional military assessment, we should have failed." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the formation. But conventional assessments failed to account for the most critical factor in warfare, the human element. Your skill, your courage, your refusal to accept limitations imposed by others. These qualities transformed apparent disadvantages into decisive advantages. Blackwood gestured toward the M60 tanks that had carried them through the battle. "These vehicles may lack the advanced systems of newer models, But in your hands, they prove more than capable of defeating any opposition. Because warfare isn't ultimately about technology. It's about humans making decisions under the most demanding circumstances imaginable. He paused, allowing the message to resonate. The 77th Tank Battalion deployed to Eagle Pass expecting a final mission. We return not as a unit awaiting deactivation, but as a force with a new purpose. The Joint Chiefs have recognized what we demonstrated here, that experience, adaptability, and tactical innovation remain the decisive factors in modern combat. The news brought visible reaction from those who hadn't yet heard of the battalion's reprieve. Straightened postures, exchanged glances, the collective relief of professionals whose value had finally been recognized. I don't know what challenges await us next, Blackwood concluded, but I know the lessons we learned and demonstrated at Eagle Pass will influence American military thinking for years to come. You've reminded the world that wars are won by soldiers, not specifications, that courage and determination can overcome technological advantage, that the human element remains paramount in warfare. As the formation dispersed to final preparation for departure, Reynolds approached Blackwood with an update from the ongoing investigation. Forensic analysis confirmed Russian origin for the chemical devices, she reported. Specifically, a research institute associated with their military intelligence directorate virtually guarantees state sponsorship, despite the mercenary cover story. Any progress tracking Zakharov? Blackwood asked. Last confirmed sighting was at a private airfield near Monterey, Reynolds replied. Intelligence suggests he departed for Eastern Europe, though we're still pursuing confirmation. In the State Department contact he mentioned, Reynolds hesitated, choosing her words carefully. That investigation continues at levels well above our access, but there have been some unexpected resignations announced in Washington over the past 24 hours. The implication was clear. Whatever thread Blackwood had pulled by reporting Zakharov's comments had led to significant developments within the government. The full story might never become public knowledge, but accountability was apparently being enforced behind the scenes. General Wallace asked me to convey his personal thanks, Reynolds added. The expanded sweeps identified similar devices at 2 other border locations. All have been neutralized before activation, thousands of lives saved without the public ever knowing they were at risk. Blackwood nodded, finding both satisfaction and discomfort in this reality. The 77th had prevented a catastrophic attack, yet the very nature of their success ensured most would never know the true significance of what had been accomplished at Eagle Pass. The tank column departed mid-morning, leaving Eagle Pass to the fresh troops arriving from Fort Hood. As they crossed the ridgeline that had served as their defensive position during the confrontation with Zakharov, Blackwood ordered a brief halt. From this vantage point, the entire battlefield spread before them, the town, the approaches, the terrain features that had influenced tactics and decisions throughout the engagement. Quite a view, Martinez observed, joining Blackwood atop the turret. Quite a battlefield, Blackwood agreed. Not many tank engagements on American soil in recent history. Hopefully not many in future history either, Martinez replied. Though if they come, I'd rather have you in command than some fresh academy graduate with nothing but simulator training. Blackwood smiled at the blunt assessment. You may get your wish. General Wallace offered me extended command of the 77th despite the retirement timeline. Martinez's expression brightened. You accepting? Still considering it, Blackwood admitted. Lot of factors to weigh. But Eagle Pass reminded me of something I'd started to forget. What's that, sir? That command isn't just about executing doctrine or managing equipment. It's about making decisions that balance mission requirements with the lives of your people, about recognizing when to follow the book and when to rewrite it based on the situation at hand. Martinez nodded understanding. Not something they can program into the next generation of battle management systems. Not yet anyway, Blackwood agreed, though I'm sure they're trying. The column resumed its journey northward, leaving Eagle Pass and its recent battle behind. For most Americans, the border incursion would soon fade from headlines, replaced by newer crises and controversies. But for the men and women of the 77th, the experience had transformed not just their professional futures, but their understanding of modern warfare. They had deployed as a unit slated for deactivation, equipped with obsolete tanks and limited expectations. They returned having demonstrated that the fundamental equations of combat remained unchanged despite technological evolution. That skill, courage, and leadership could overcome material disadvantage. That the human element remained the decisive factor on the battlefield. 25 years later, An aging Samuel Blackwood stood before the Patton Museum at Fort Knox, Kentucky. At 83, he moved more slowly than during his command days, but his posture remained military straight. His gaze still carried the sharp assessment of a natural tactician. Before him stood the familiar silhouette of an M60 Patton tank. Not just any M60, but Iron Lady, his personal command vehicle from Eagle Pass. The vehicle's battle scars had been preserved during restoration, visible reminders of the combat it had survived. A bronze plaque detailed the tank's service history with special emphasis on its role in what history now called the Battle of Eagle Pass. "She looks good," observed a familiar voice beside him. Blackwood turned to find Jack Thompson, his former driver, approaching with the deliberate gait of a man accustomed to ceremony. The lieutenant's bars of Blackwood's memory had been replaced by the stars of a full general, a career progression that few would have predicted for the young tank driver from rural Kentucky. "General Thompson," Blackwood acknowledged with a smile. "Or should I still call you Kid like during the old days?" Thompson laughed, the sound carrying the same youthful enthusiasm that had characterized his approach to driving 70 tons of armor across impossible terrain. "Save the general for the Pentagon staff. Out here, I'm still just the driver who got Iron Lady stuck in that irrigation ditch during training. As I recall, you also got her unstuck through some creative use of the throttle that nearly gave Martinez a heart attack." The shared memory bridged the decades between their time as crew and the present moment. Despite the passage of years and the divergence of their careers, the bond forged in combat remained intact. "How many of the old crew could make it?" Blackwood asked, gesturing toward the museum entrance where a small gathering had assembled for the dedication ceremony. "Martinez couldn't travel, his heart condition's acting up again," Thompson replied. "But he sent a video message. Rawlins is here, still arguing with anyone who'll listen about optimal ammunition sequencing for defeating reactive armor." Blackwood smiled at the image. Some things never changed. "And Captain Reynolds?" "Director Reynolds now," Thompson corrected. "She retired from the agency last year. Said she wouldn't miss this dedication for anything, not after what the 77th accomplished at Eagle Pass." The ceremony itself proved mercifully brief, a consideration for the aging veterans in attendance. The museum director spoke about the historical significance of the M60 Patton and its unexpected renaissance following the Eagle Pass engagement. A Pentagon representative detailed the technical modifications that had extended the tank's service life another decade beyond its planned retirement. Thompson, as the ranking officer present, spoke about the battle's influence on modern military doctrine, the renewed emphasis on crew proficiency over technological advantage, on tactical adaptability over rigid procedure, on the human dimension of warfare in an increasingly automated age. At West Point today, he concluded, cadets study the Battle of Eagle Pass not just as a tactical case study, but as a fundamental lesson in the principles of leadership. They learned that Captain Samuel Blackwood's decisions that day exemplified the core truth of warfare, that motivated, well-led human beings remain the decisive factor on any battlefield, regardless of technological disparity. As applause followed Thompson's remarks, Blackwood's thoughts drifted back to that decisive morning when Iron Lady had led the assault into Eagle Pass. The uncertainty, the fear masked by professional focus, the split-second decisions that had determined life or death for his crew and others. History had simplified and sanitized these moments, transforming the chaotic reality of combat into structured lessons and principles. Following the ceremony, Blackwood found himself surrounded by younger officers eager to hear first-hand accounts of the battle. He obliged with carefully selected stories, balancing honesty about combat's realities with the recognition that some experiences defied complete description to those who hadn't shared them. "Is it true you modified the ammunition loading sequence mid-battle?" asked an earnest captain from the armor school faculty. "That was Sergeant Rawlins' innovation," Blackwood corrected, always careful to attribute achievements to their proper sources. "I just had the sense to implement it when he proposed it." "But the manual explicitly prohibited alternate loading patterns," the officer persisted, revealing the textbook mindset that often characterized instructors. "Son," Blackwood replied patiently, "there comes a moment in combat when you must decide whether to follow the manual or accomplish the mission. The enemy rarely cooperates with our doctrinal expectations." The gathering eventually dispersed, leaving Blackwood alone with Thompson beside the tank that had carried them through their most significant battle. They stood in comfortable silence, each lost in personal recollections of that day and the changes it had brought to their lives. "They've got it wrong, you know," Thompson said finally. "The official history, the lesson plans at the academy." "How so?" Blackwood asked, curious about his former driver's perspective. "They focus on the tactics, the technical modifications, the command decisions. All important factors, certainly." Thompson gestured toward Iron Lady. "But they miss the essential truth of what happened at Eagle Pass." "Which was?" "That 16 obsolete tanks with veteran crews who trusted each other accomplished what an entire mechanized battalion with the latest equipment might have failed to achieve." Thompson turned to face his former commander directly. "It wasn't about the tanks, or even about your leadership, though God knows that was crucial. It was about the bonds between the crews. About Martinez knowing exactly when to load the next round without being told. About Rollins anticipating your fire commands before you issued them. About me understanding your intent from the smallest gesture or tone shift." Blackwood nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in Thompson's assessment. Cohesion, the intangible factor that transforms individual competence into collective effectiveness. "Exactly," Thompson agreed. "Something no technology can replace, no matter how advanced the systems become." As afternoon light cast long shadows across the museum grounds, the two men shared stories from their respective careers after Eagle Pass. Thompson's rise through the ranks had taken him to command positions throughout the Army, eventually to the Pentagon itself. Blackwood had accepted Wallace's offer of extended command, leading the 77th through its transition to a specialized role before finally retiring 5 years later. "Did they ever catch Zakharov?" Blackwood asked, still curious about the mercenary commander who had nearly outmaneuvered them. "Not officially," Thompson replied with the careful phrasing of a man accustomed to security classifications. "Though there was an unfortunate accident involving a former Russian military officer in Belgrade about 6 months after Eagle Pass. Remarkable resemblance, from what I understand." The diplomatic response confirmed what Blackwood had long suspected, that Zakharov's escape had been temporary, his eventual fate determined by shadowy operations that would never appear in official records. "And the chemical weapons program behind those devices?" Thompson's expression turned grave. "Dismantled. Completely." The diplomatic language was very polite, but the message delivered through back channels left no ambiguity about the consequences of any similar attempt in the future. As evening approached, the museum staff began preparing to close for the day. Blackwood took a final moment beside Iron Lady, placing his hand on the battle-scarred armor that had protected him and his crew through the crucible of combat. "She was a good tank," he said simply. "The best," Thompson agreed, "though it was never about the machine itself." "No," Blackwood nodded. "It was about the people who operated it, who transformed 70 tons of metal and machinery into an effective fighting system through skill and determination." "That's what we're really dedicating today," Thompson observed. "Not just the tank, but the principle it represents. The reminder that warfare, for all its technological evolution, remains fundamentally human." As they turned to leave, Blackwood cast a final glance at the M60 that had carried him through his most significant command. In the fading light, the tank seemed to stand as both historical artifact and enduring symbol, a testament to the truth that humans, not machines, determine the outcome of battle. That courage, skill, and leadership could overcome material disadvantage. That the decisive factor in warfare remained the human element, regardless of technological advancement. "You know what still bothers me about Eagle Pass?" Thompson asked as they walked toward the parking area. "What's that?" "Zakharov said something to you during your meeting. Something about certain elements in Washington preferring the situation remain contained. We never did get the full story on that connection, did we?" "No," Blackwood admitted, "though there were those resignations Reynolds mentioned, and some unusual transfers within certain departments in the months that followed." "Politics," Thompson said, the single word carrying volumes of meaning between military professionals. "Politics," Blackwood agreed, "the shadow battlefield that determines where and how the visible ones unfold." They reached Thompson's staff car, where a patient aide waited to transport the general to his next engagement. Before departing, Thompson extended his hand in the formal gesture of professional respect. "It was an honor serving under your command, Captain Blackwood," he said, deliberately using the rank from their shared service. "Everything I've accomplished since traces back to the lessons learned in that tank under your leadership." Blackwood accepted the handshake, momentarily overtaken by the recognition that his greatest legacy wasn't the battle itself, but its influence on the officers he had commanded, those who had gone on to shape military thinking and doctrine based on principles demonstrated at Eagle Pass. "The honor was mine, General," he replied with equal formality. "Though I still maintain you were the finest tank driver I ever commanded, despite that irrigation ditch incident." Thompson's laughter echoed across the parking lot as he departed, leaving Blackwood alone with his thoughts. The old commander remained for a moment, gazing back at the museum where Iron Lady would stand as silent witness to a battle that had changed not just his life, but military doctrine itself. The lesson of Eagle Pass had proven enduring, not because of the specific tactics or technical innovations, but because it reaffirmed the fundamental truth of warfare, that humans, not machines, determined outcomes. That experience and leadership could overcome material disadvantage. That courage and determination remained the decisive factors on any battlefield. As Blackwood finally turned toward his own vehicle, he felt the satisfaction of a career that had culminated in demonstrating that essential truth. Iron Lady would stand in the museum as a historical artifact, but the principles she represented would continue influencing military thought long after the tank itself had faded into distant memory. In an age increasingly dominated by technology, the 77th Tank Battalion had reminded the world that warfare remained, at its core, a human endeavor. That technological evolution could never eliminate the decisive importance of the soldiers who operated the equipment, made the decisions, and demonstrated the courage to act when faced with seemingly impossible odds. That, Blackwood reflected as he departed, was a legacy worth preserving, a reminder to future generations that regardless of technological advancement, the human element remained paramount in warfare and would for as long as conflicts required resolution through force of arms. The sun set over Fort Knox, casting long shadows across the museum grounds, where Iron Lady stood in silent testament to that enduring truth.